I told my men to go back and keep watch over the village, then rode hard through the night to Tianyong City. I was starving when I arrived, but there was no time to eat. I found Ling Hu Zheng, and he brought me into the Fengling army camp. In the main tent, Ling Hu Xiaoshan was sitting behind her desk, giving me a cold look. She started mocking me about drinking with girls at the brothel. I told her plainly that I nearly got killed there. That got her attention. I asked everyone to leave the tent except her and her father. Then I laid it out. There's a spy in the Fengling army. The assassination attempt at the brothel was meant for me, and the killers wanted the account book. I explained my reasoning. If the leak came from my side, the killers would have gone to my village and used my people as leverage. My people are mostly farmers with no connections to officials. The only way the enemy knew about the account book was through someone in her camp. Xiaoshan went quiet. She knew I was right. We figured out the spy was her maid, Warner, who had been present when the account book was discussed. When she called for Warner, a soldier reported the maid had just left the camp using a fake order. Ling Hu Zheng immediately went after her. Once her father left, it was just the two of us in the tent. She started questioning me again about my night at the brothel, clearly unhappy. I pushed back. I'm not the type to let her boss me around just because she's a general. I reminded her that in front of me, she's not a commander, she's my fiancé. She tried to argue that we were in her military tent, not at home. I didn't bother arguing. I just walked over, grabbed her hand, and pulled her into my arms. The fearsome general everyone trembles before turned into a flustered, panicking girl who couldn't even form a proper sentence. I dared her to scream for help, and her face turned bright red. She started hitting my chest with her little fists, but I caught her wrists and pinned her against the desk. I leaned in close, and she finally stopped fighting, turning her head away. I could tell her tough exterior was melting. Underneath all that strength, she was just a girl who wanted to be cared for. I kissed her on the cheek and asked if she'd behave now. She whispered that she would, calling me husband for the first time. Though she was so embarrassed, she looked ready to explode. I told her to turn her face toward me because I wanted a real kiss. She froze up, then slowly turned her head like a stiff robot. I kissed her hard. She resisted for a split second, then went completely soft. When I pulled back, I noticed her eyes were full of tears, staring at me like I'd wronged her. I reached out to wipe her tears, but suddenly she snapped like a little wolf and bit down hard on my hand. Her eyes were fierce, but the way she looked, with those little fangs and that pouty, stubborn expression, I couldn't help but want to laugh. She reminded me of the tiger cubs back home. When she realized she'd actually drawn blood, she panicked immediately. She grabbed my hand and held it against her forehead, looking like a child who knew she'd done something wrong. I lifted her chin and told her it was nothing. I wouldn't hold a grudge against my own little wife. While she was still hesitating, I pushed her back down on the desk and kissed her again, harder this time. But now she didn't fight. She slowly wrapped her arms around my waist and melted into me. I walked out of the tent feeling pretty satisfied. That afternoon, Long Ju arrived at camp with the surviving soldiers. As Xiaoshan had previously ordered, Long Ju received 100 strikes as punishment the moment she returned. Her backside was a bloody mess, and she couldn't walk. 2 soldiers carried her into the command tent. Xiaoshan felt a bit guilty about it, since Long Ju had actually been trying to help, but the punishment was already done. Long Ju reported something that caught Xiaoshan's attention. I had killed over 20 trained assassins by myself in Wenhuang County, and some kind of terrifying hidden weapon was involved. Long Ju said she'd heard 2 thunderous blasts from inside the brothel and believed those were the sounds of my weapon firing. Xiaoshan jumped to her feet in shock when she heard that just 2 shots had taken out that many elite fighters. She was furious I hadn't shared this weapon with her to help fight the northern barbarians, and immediately wanted to go see the evidence for herself. After finishing things up, I headed back to the village, arriving the next evening. Wang Shan and Wang Dinglu were hauling baskets of iron or to the blacksmith workshop. Since Honda had already gotten word about our situation, this was their last chance to mine before we'd need to set up ambushes. They told me they were about 600 genes short of 5,000, and could finish in a couple hours if everyone pushed hard. I told them to keep at it, and had the kitchen prepare meat for everyone. 5,000 gene of, or would yield over 2,000 gene of iron after smelting. Enough for roughly 500 weapons. That was plenty for now. The mine was close to the village, so we could always sneak back for more later. I collected all the iron nails and pellets that Zhang Tizui had prepared, along with some specially fired clay pots from the brick kiln. These were for making grenades. I'd only had 3 last time, 1 for testing, 2 used on the assassins. I needed more for self-defense. My operation was just getting started. Without enough gunpowder or steel, I couldn't mass-produce firearms yet, so grenades were the priority. Muskets and cannons would come later once I could build proper steel smelting furnaces. But I planned to keep that technology strictly secret, even from Zhang Tizui. If it leaked, I'd be finished. Only when I could set up a compartmentalized workshop where each team handled one step without seeing the others would I consider sharing the knowledge. Back at the courtyard, my 4 women were sitting around a fire drinking tea. The Mu sisters each held a tiger cub, chatting with Wu Xiangyue and Lu Yan. They all greeted me warmly when I came in. The cubs had grown fast, already the size of a big dog. I tried handing one to Lu Yan, but she backed away, terrified. We'd been having her feed the cubs during the day to build her courage, but those little beasts screaming for meat still scared her half to death. Then we heard a branch snap outside. Wu Xiangyue and I were instantly alert, and even the cubs perked up their ears. She had her hand on her whip. I told her to always be ready to protect the household. No one answered when we called out. We rushed outside and spotted a dark figure trying to flee. Wu Xiangyue chased him down, cracked her whip across his back, then wrapped it around his ankle and dragged him back to me. The man was in his 30s, and when I looked at him closely, he seemed familiar. He was Zhang Erma's son. I'd already warned Zhang Erma to leave the area after our confrontation at Shango village. His son showing up at my village in the middle of the night told me everything I needed to know. The man tried to play dumb, claiming he was just a drunk who wandered in. He did reek of alcohol, and his face was flushed, but I wasn't buying it. I waved Mu Wanqing over with one of the tiger cubs, and the man screamed and tried to bolt, confirming he knew exactly where he was and who I was. Wu Xiangyue kicked him flat and pinned him down with her foot. Just as I suspected, Zhang Erma had sent his son to spy on us. That old man had been packing up to leave ever since I slapped him and warned him off. I figured Zhang Erma probably didn't send his son. The kid was young and hot-headed, got drunk, and came looking for trouble on his own. He must have spotted the women playing with the tiger cubs in the yard, got scared, and stepped on a branch. The sight of real tigers probably sobered him up instantly. Wu Xiangyue asked if we should just beat him up and let him go. Mu Wanqing pulled her aside and shushed her. She knew me well enough to know that anyone who came after my household wasn't walking away. I had both tiger cubs brought over. The drunk man was already sweating with fear. I ordered the cubs to chase him. They were still young, but they were tigers. They only recognized family, and everyone else was fair game. Wu Xiangyue felt sorry for the man, but I set her straight. What if I hadn't been home? What if more people had come? Zhang Erma's family clearly knew about this, so they'd made their choice. The next morning, Zhang Erma's servant found a mangled body at their front gate, torn apart by wild animals, only recognizable by the clothes. Zhang Erma fainted on the spot. This time he didn't hesitate. He packed up his gold and silver, dismissed his servants, and left Shango village heading for Wenhuang County. But Wang Dinglu intercepted him on the road and finished the job. All the seized property, land deeds, gold, silver, went to Mu Wanqing for the books. Days passed. The second heavy snow came. My father-in-law, Mu Linfeng, arrived with Mu Xiaoliang to watch over the horse ranch. I set them up in Wang Changxing's old mansion. The Mu sisters were thrilled to have their parents nearby and kept dragging Wu Xiangyue over to visit. I spent those days watching the iron mine, waiting for Gao Lufeng's men to show up. But after several days, only 2 scouts appeared and didn't get close. I let them go to avoid tipping anyone off. Then something unexpected happened. A fancy carriage rolled into the village flying the Tianyong City Magistrate's flag. Wang Dinglu spotted it from his lookout and rushed to tell me. I was puzzled. My only connection to the magistrate was the martial arts tournament where I'd crippled his second son, Zhang Renzi. Yet he'd never come after me for it. Something felt off. I sent for Lin Xiaoxi and went ahead to check things out. The carriage stopped at Wang Changxing's old mansion. A man in official robes, around 50 years old, stepped out. Magistrate Zhang Yuanzhong himself. He was looking for Dr. Lin, my father-in-law. He'd brought his injured son all the way from Tianyong City, through Wenhuang County, tracking down my father-in-law's whereabouts. The man was nearly in tears, begging for help. He said every other doctor had failed to heal the boy, the same son I'd injured over a month ago. My father-in-law had once been qualified to serve as an imperial physician, so his reputation had reached even the magistrate. He humbly agreed to examine the young man right away. Magistrate Zhang was thrilled when my father-in-law agreed to help. His men carried Zhang Renzi inside. The kid looked terrible, skin and bones, body twisted from the bone-splitting technique I'd used on him, eyes dull with pain. He barely looked human anymore. My father-in-law winced just looking at him and cursed whatever evil bully had done this. Zhang Yuanzhong just smiled bitterly. He'd wanted revenge after it happened, but Ling Huzheng had visited him that same day with 2 messages. First, that I was going to be his son-in-law, and second, that Zhang Renzi had brought it on himself by trying to kill me first. The magistrate had no military power and couldn't fight the Linghu family, so he'd swallowed his anger. My father-in-law was getting angrier by the minute at this bully, until Wu Xiangyue came outside, recognized Zhang Renzi, and blurted out his name. When my father-in-law learned that I was the one who'd done this, everything flipped. He demanded to know what happened, and Wu Xiangyue explained it was from the martial arts tournament. The old man's attitude changed completely. He turned on the magistrate. Your son tried to steal my son-in-law's concubine? A sweet girl like Xiangyue? I can't treat this. The technique is too advanced. Get out. He called for Zhai Shanchuan, and the big man appeared from the woodshed. The magistrate's guards grabbed their swords nervously. That's when I walked in. I took one look at Zhang Renzi lying there and nearly laughed. So the magistrate had come looking for a doctor and ended up on my turf, begging my father-in-law of all people. You couldn't make this up. My father-in-law rushed over to me, saying he'd follow my lead on this. Then he shot the magistrate a disgusted look. Zhang Yuanzhong smiled awkwardly and asked me to let bygones be bygones. I told him flatly that I'm a petty man who holds grudges. He looked miserable, a high-ranking official having to grovel before someone like me. But he knew who I was engaged to. My status made me scarier than most distant princes, and he was just a local magistrate. Zhang Renzi, lying there with bloodshot eyes, stared at me with pure hatred. Seeing me standing next to Wu Xiangyue was the ultimate humiliation for him. He croaked out, "Father, kill him." The magistrate gritted his teeth and slapped his own son across the face, cursing him for being an arrogant fool who didn't know his place. He told the boy that me sparing his life was already the greatest mercy he could ask for. The magistrate's slap left 5 bright finger marks on Zhang Renzi's face. Then he came back to me, bowing low, promising his son would never cause trouble again. He told me to name my conditions. Anything he could do, he would. Now we were talking. Zhang Yuanzhong was the magistrate of Tianyong City, in charge of 7 county officials below him. I needed someone like him for political matters. So I made my move. I told him that the village chief of Shango village had recently disappeared, and since my village and Shango were close together, I wanted to merge them, ideally into a new county, with me in charge. He nearly choked. He explained that creating a new county required approval from the Ministry of Officials in the capital, which was beyond his authority. But then Wu Jiang stepped in with a brilliant idea. He pointed out that our 2 villages sat along the same river, and downstream was an important waterway. Since I'd already cleared out the bandits at the water fortress, we could combine all 3 locations into an official river crossing post. Under imperial law, a crossing post needed a commanding officer called a wei. In this case, the Xinjiang Wei. It would function almost like a county, but only needed the magistrate's direct approval. Zhang Yuanzhong sighed and agreed. He warned me it was a low-ranking position with no official grade, just a minor post with about 50 men and 3 taels of silver per month in salary. But he'd send weapons, armor, and the official uniform once he got back. I was more than satisfied. It didn't matter that the rank was small. It was my first real step. I now had a legitimate reason to build my own force. The rules said 50 men, but I could easily triple that. As long as I wasn't asking the court to pay for it, nobody would care. Then I reminded the magistrate that his son's injuries had been left too long. Even with my skills, Zhang Renzi would never fully recover. He'd be able to live normally, but his martial arts were gone forever. The magistrate didn't mind at all. He just wanted the boy healthy enough to marry and have children. I called over Zhai Shanchuan and Wu Jiang, and we straightened Zhang Renzi's twisted body by force. The screaming was like a pig being slaughtered. He passed out from the pain almost immediately. I used the most brutal treatment method on purpose. I wasn't going to make this comfortable for him. When I finished, his body was straightened out and his limbs could move freely again. My father-in-law was stunned. He'd expected the treatment to take days of acupuncture and still not achieve results this good. He quietly put away his golden needles and turned away, His pride was a bit wounded knowing his son-in-law's medical skills had surpassed his own. My wives all looked at me with stars in their eyes. The magistrate thanked me endlessly and left with his son. Afterward, I told Wu Jiang his idea about the crossing post had been a major contribution. I planned to make him my deputy, the second-in-command of the new Xinjiang Wei post. Wang Dinglu and Zhai Shanchuan would each lead a squad stationed at the water fortress, while Lin Xiaoxi would continue guarding the village. It looked like we'd be moving our base of operations to the water fortress soon. Wu Jiang accepted that he'd need to eventually station himself at the water fortress once we set up the crossing post, but that was months away. He could stay warm in the village for now. Right after the magistrate left, Wang Dinglu and Lin Xiaoxi finally showed up late. I was about to chew them out, but Wang Dinglu cut in with urgent news. Scouts had spotted bandits 20 li from the village, and the men at the mine also reported enemies bypassing the mine entirely and heading straight for the village. Two groups converging on us. I was alarmed. Were they trying to wipe us out and take the iron mine for themselves? Wang Dinglu explained they'd already set up defensive lines around the village, which was why they'd been late. I kicked him and told him to send someone to notify me first next time. Then I ordered the Mu sisters to go home and had Wu Xiangyue warn the villagers to take shelter. At the village entrance, our people were already in position, archers on rooftops, men behind trees and rocks. Lin Xiaoxi's fighters lined up along the main road with war carts. The open field at the entrance was covered in snow, flat and wide, perfect for an ambush. Wu Jiang and I talked through what was happening. Gao Lufeng's bandits had been suspiciously quiet for days. Now I understood why. They'd been preparing a major assault. They clearly knew about our ambush at the mine and had bypassed it, which meant they'd figured out our identities. We pieced it together. After I killed Madame Wang at the brothel, someone investigated and connected me to the village. And Zhai Rang, when he'd betrayed us before, had probably given them information about our setup. That explained everything. They knew who we were and where we lived. Their plan was clever. One group would pin down our forces at the mine, while the main force hit the undefended village. If the first group avoided the mine ambush, both forces would combine to crush us, then circle back to destroy whoever we'd left at the mine. But they'd made one critical mistake. The 12 riders would arrive fresh enough, but the 30-plus foot soldiers in heavy armor had been hiking over mountains. By the time they reached us, they'd be exhausted. Tired soldiers on a battlefield, that's a fatal error in warfare. I gave the order to Lin Xiaoxi, Wang Dian, and Wang Dinglu. Once the fighting starts, kill every last one. Not a single bandit could escape. Half an hour later, riders appeared on the distant hilltop. Honda was in the lead, waving a long saber, looking toward our village. One of his men nervously asked if it might be a trap since the village was so quiet. Honda called him a coward, bragging about his surprise attack tactics, and insisting we couldn't possibly know they were coming. He screamed for his men to charge and leave no one alive, then winced when the yelling tore at his still healing wounds from our last encounter. Honda ordered his 12 riders to charge. They galloped down the slope toward the village entrance, but it turned into a complete disaster. The snow and soft farmland tripped up the untrained horses. Riders flew off. Horses stumbled into mud. Men and animals crashed into each other. Honda himself was the first to fall, face first into a snowbank, then got pinned under horses twice. Watching from the rooftop, I could barely keep a straight face. Wang Dinglu asked if we should attack, but I told him to wait. The foot soldiers finally reached the hilltop and saw the mess below. Some idiot yelled, "It's an ambush," and the exhausted bandits panicked. Then the riders started cursing at them, saying there was no ambush and to come help dig out Honda. All 30-plus foot soldiers scrambled down to help. That's when I gave the order. Wang Dinglu blew his whistle. Wang Dian's archers opened fire from the rooftops, raining arrows down on the bandits. Then I called for Lin Xiaoxi, who rolled out 5 war carts to surround them. 2 volleys of arrows dropped over a dozen bandits. A second whistle brought more of our men from the surrounding hills to cut off any escape. By the time Lin Xiaoxi's carts reached the enemy, over half were already dead. I ordered the final charge. It was over quickly. Wang Dinglu dragged Honda before me. The coward was pretending to be unconscious. I slapped him awake and threatened to cut off something precious if he kept faking. He immediately started begging, calling me Grandpa Lu, but then screams came from behind us. I turned and saw the hilltops swarming with new enemies, a massive force that immediately unleashed a dense rain of arrows. killing several of my men on the spot. At least 50 archers, with even more bandits behind them. I grabbed Honda and punched him. He swore they'd only brought 40-something men. Then he realized it must be their boss coming to rescue him and started gloating. I knocked him out cold. Wu Jiang rushed over and confirmed there were at least 100 more enemies. We'd been tricked. Honda's pathetic force was bait all along, and Honda himself didn't even know it. The boss of Gao Lufeng was far smarter than I'd expected. The group at the mine was probably just a decoy too. We'd already lost 4 men in that first volley. I scanned the situation quickly. We were outnumbered and exposed in open ground. I started barking orders. Lin Xiaoxi would reorganize for street fighting inside the village. Wang Dian's archers would form 3-man teams to support the main force. Zhai Shanchuan would escort Wu Jiang to safety and return to my side. Wang Dinglu would patrol the perimeter, guarding my home, the horse ranch, and the workshops against infiltration. Everyone scattered. Wang Dian stayed near me with 2 men, breathing hard, sweating. The scale of this attack had shaken him. Gao Lufeng shouldn't have had this many fighters, even after expanding. With the 40 we'd just killed, and now over 100 more, it looked like they'd committed everything they had. This was going to be a brutal fight. I figured Gao Lufeng must have recruited drifters, villagers, and smaller bandit groups. Their total numbers were probably over 300. When the arrows thinned out, I peeked out to assess the situation. Thanks to quick orders, we'd only lost a few of Wang Dingliu's sentries in that initial volley. Lin Xiaoxi had already pulled the war carts back under arrow fire and repositioned them to block every entrance into the village. Now it was the archers' show. The enemy launched a full assault. These weren't like Honda's clowns. They wore leather armor, carried long sabers, moved in tight formation with real killing intent. It actually looked like a proper military advance. Lin Xiaoxi blocked every path into the village with war carts. When the first wave of bandits reached the narrow turns, dozens of spears shot out from the carts, cutting them down. Before they could retreat, Wang Dian's archers opened fire from inside the houses on both sides. At this range, even leather armor couldn't stop the arrows. They punched straight through. The bandits panicked. A commander behind them screamed for them to push forward and get inside the buildings. They smashed through windows and walls, but Wang Dian's men had already moved. When bandits tried rushing out of courtyards, the war carts rolled up and blocked the exits, spearing anyone who came through. Others tried climbing walls to get behind the carts, but were picked off by arrows instantly. Their commander, a scrawny man on horseback who I figured was Li Sanpao, the third boss, ordered a retreat. That was a fatal mistake. Turning their backs meant Wang Dian's archers could stand at the windows and shoot freely without worrying about defense. The bandits became living targets. By the time they stumbled out, barely 1 in 10 was still standing. Li Sanpao ordered his archers to fire at the windows for suppression. But our archers were already low on arrows since we'd prepared in a rush, and his volley just restocked us. Our guys hid behind walls, laughing as they collected the enemy's arrows off the ground. When the timing was right, I shouted the counterattack order. Wang Dian's archers gathered arrows and prepared to fire back. Lin Xiaoxi pushed all 5 war carts forward toward the enemy's main force. Li Sanpao's archers shot desperately at the carts, but I'd had them upgraded after our first battle. Extra thick wooden boards on all sides, double-layered in front. The arrows couldn't penetrate. After 20 meters, the carts looked like giant porcupines bristling with stuck arrows. Li Sanpao was furious. He'd lost over 40 men in this attack alone, nearly 100 total counting Honda's group. If he went back empty-handed, their boss would have his head, especially since it was his idea to use Honda as bait. In desperation, he ordered a cavalry charge to smash the carts with horsepower. Only 6 riders, including himself. He led the charge, and the others reluctantly followed, each targeting 1 cart. Lin Xiaoxi's men inside the cart stayed calm. The horses might have enough force to break through, but I knew Wang Dian sharpshooters would never let those horses get close enough to build up speed. Just as I expected, when the cavalry charged, Wang Dian's archers shifted position silently. Before the riders could get close, a dozen arrows flew out with deadly accuracy. Every shot hit its mark. All 6 riders, including Li Sanpao, were knocked off their horses before reaching the war carts. The remaining bandits saw their third boss fall and scattered in every direction. Lin Xiaoxi, Wang Dian, Zhai Shanchuan, and Wang Dinglu all gave chase. Lin Xiaoxi even grabbed a loose horse and rode after them swinging a saber, desperate not to miss out on any kills. The battle wrapped up within 15 minutes, but we didn't have enough riders to catch everyone. About 30 bandits escaped. An hour later, Wang Dinglu gave me the report. 124 enemies killed, 3 captured, over 90 weapons seized, 70-plus sets of armor, 7 good horses, and 300 recovered arrows. On our side, 7 wounded, 2 seriously, and 5 dead, mostly Wang Dingliu's sentries from that first surprise volley. I ordered the fallen brothers brought home for proper burial and 10 taels of silver for each of their families. Then I handed the prisoners, Li Sanpao and Hondo included, over to Wang Dinglu. His men had suffered the most, so he deserved the right to deal with them. I told him he could do whatever he wanted, but he had to squeeze out every bit of information they knew. Wu Jiang came over and pointed out that while Gao Lufeng was badly hurt, their boss wouldn't let this go. He'd likely rally other bandit groups for a combined counterattack, possibly 100 strong. Wu Jiang suggested we strike first, wipe out Gao Lufeng completely, then pick off the surrounding bandit camps and northern barbarian outposts one by one. Any bandits we captured or convinced to surrender could be pardoned through Magistrate Zhang and folded into our new river crossing force. I raised the obvious concern. Could we trust former bandits? What about betrayal? Wu Jiang said he personally knew several small bandit leaders who were friendly with his old group and never harmed civilians. He was confident he could talk them into joining us. I agreed and sent him off. But the moment he left, I called Lin Xiaoxi over and told her to follow Wu Jiang secretly. I wanted to know exactly how he planned to convince those bandits to surrender. I trusted Wang Dingliu's loyalty, but he was originally a bandit under Wu Jiang, so Lin Xiaoxi was the right person for this job. Back home, my 3 wives had been waiting. After the battle outside, I had another round of battles inside with them. Afterward, I had Lu Yin prepare a big tub of hot water so I could soak. I just settled in when the door opened. I figured it was one of my wives coming to help, so I kept my eyes closed. But the hands on my shoulders were shaky and clumsy, not like any of them. I snapped around and found Lu Yin standing there, face bright red, eyes barely open. She said Mu Wanqing had sent her and taught her how to serve me. I took the towel from her and told her to leave. Her eyes immediately welled up with tears. She begged me to accept her, saying it was her own choice, that nobody forced her. Living in my household had been the warmest, most peaceful time of her life. Good food, kind treatment from all 3 wives who never treated her like a servant and even sent supplies to her father. She saw this as a debt she could never repay. Looking at how earnest Lu Yin was, I knew refusing again would break her heart. She'd already offered herself twice, so I let her in. She climbed into the tub, face flushed, and did her best to please me using whatever techniques Mu Wanqing had taught her. She was clumsy but tried hard. It was her first time. The next morning, I woke up in the old house. After the bath, my 3 wives had dragged me there for more fun, and Lu Yin had stayed to serve me through the night. When I stepped outside, Carpenter Zhuzi was already waiting with the tower shields I'd designed. He'd done a great job, even improved my original plans by enlarging the weapon slots so 2 shields placed together formed a hole for archers to shoot through, and adding a sliding groove for spear thrusts to save energy. I told him to add a few more features, locking pins on each side so shields could connect together, a foldable support leg so they could stand without someone holding them, and smoother handles to protect the soldiers' fingers. He understood immediately and rushed back to work. Time was tight, so I told him to make a template first and get everyone building as many as possible. Then I found Tian Laoba, who knew the surrounding forests well. I needed bamboo, 5 or 6 meters long, at least 4 years old for toughness, with the tips sharpened to points. This came from memories of my past life. These bamboo spears had been devastating weapons on the southeast coast battlefields. Eventually, I'd have iron tips made and coated with my father-in-law's special poison. Combined with the tower shields for defense, even a woman hiding behind them could be a lethal fighter. 2 quiet days passed. Zhuzi delivered 60 tower shields, and Wang Shan brought back plenty of bamboo. I personally demonstrated the formations and drilled everyone. 2 days later, Wu Jiang returned from his mission, grinning proudly. He'd convinced 5 bandit groups to join us, about 180 people total, arriving by tomorrow. Most were families, he said, farmers and refugees who'd banded together for survival, never really committed serious crimes. I smiled and didn't challenge his story. I could guess the truth. These were likely remnants of the Old Wei Kingdom, persecuted by the current dynasty and forced into hiding. Wu Jiang had probably used his status as Wei royalty to recruit them. Under current law, gathering Wei remnants was considered rebellion. But he was building my forces, so I let it go. After Wu Jiang left, Lin Xiaoxi showed up, clearly exhausted from days of tailing him. She reported something troubling. Every time Wu Jiang entered a bandit camp, he carried a small box. She'd snuck a look inside while he was out. It contained a beautifully carved jade object with writing she couldn't read. My heart skipped. A jade object with inscriptions that Wu Jiang guarded so carefully. That could only be one thing. The imperial seal of the Old Wei Kingdom. This was a serious matter. He was using the royal seal to rally former Wei subjects to his cause. And Wang Dinglu had never mentioned this to me. Zhai Rang had even told us before he died that Wu Jiang kept all his secrets in a box. So why had Wang Dinglu stayed quiet? Did he not know? Or was his loyalty just an act? I told Lin Xiaoxi to go fetch Wang Dinglu immediately. Wang Dinglu was genuinely shocked when I mentioned the jade seal. His eyes went wide, and he clearly had no idea. After thinking hard, he remembered that they'd once robbed a merchant who was a descendant of Old Wei Kingdom people. The merchant had an old government seal. That was probably what Wu Jiang was using to impress those refugees. None of them had ever seen a real imperial seal, so any official-looking stamp would fool them. I let it go. What mattered was whether Wu Jiang had real thoughts of rebellion. If it was just an old government stamp and he was using it to recruit people for me, that was fine. I shifted the conversation to Gao Lufeng. Wang Dinglu reported what Honda and Li Sanpao had confessed. Gao Lufeng had absorbed refugees and smaller gangs, growing to around 500 fighters. Their mysterious boss was secretly developing some kind of weapon to use against the Fengling army, and even bragged about kidnapping General Nangong as his bride. Li Sanpao had seen the weapon demonstrated once. It looked like a giant bow. That's what had convinced the smaller gangs to join. I figured it out quickly. It had to be an attempt at building a crossbow siege weapon, a bed crossbow. Zhai Rang must have studied my crossbow design during the attack on the barbarian camp and drawn up plans from memory, then handed them over when he defected to Gao Lufeng. But without proper technical knowledge, especially the trigger mechanism, they'd only managed to build an oversized bow, nowhere near as powerful or fast as a real bed crossbow. The next day, Wu Jiang brought the 5 bandit leaders to meet me. I took them to the blacksmith workshop area on purpose, surrounded by brick kilns, forges, and Lin Xiaoxi's guards nearby. I wanted them to see my strength and resources. The 5 leaders looked around wide-eyed. They were Wei Kingdom refugees who'd become bandits out of necessity. Seeing this stable, prosperous settlement confirmed they'd made the right choice. Then, perfectly timed, a group from the magistrate's office arrived. Zhang Yuanzhong had worked fast. A clerk named Qiu Hui read the official decree. The entire Xinjiang River area, including our village, was being consolidated, with a water fortress established at the crossing as a major supply point for river transport. The new territory was renamed Xinhe Crossing, and I was appointed its commander, the Xinhe Crossing captain. I could name my own deputy and officers. The 5 bandit leaders watched the government officials bow and defer to me, and that settled any remaining doubts. My territory now covered all the hills, land, the water fortress, and the river crossing, the size of a large county, all under my control. Their people would have real security here. I named Wang Dinglu as naval commander and Zhai Shanchuan as infantry commander. An artist drew their portraits for official records, and they received armor and uniforms. After everything was wrapped up, I slipped Qiu Hui a 100-tael silver note as a tip. The man was stunned. That was 2 years' salary for him. He left deeply impressed. Wu Jiang held up his new deputy commander uniform and made the case to the 5 bandit leaders. They'd seen the government officials defer to me with their own eyes. That was all the proof they needed. These men were descendants of the Old Wei Kingdom, pushed into banditry by persecution. Now they had a real home and a protector. They congratulated me on my appointment, one after another. I spread out the official map that the magistrate's office had sent. The territory of Xinhe Crossing was enormous, stretching from 10 li north of the village, right where the iron mines sat, all the way south along the Xinjiang River to the old water fortress. The surrounding hills were included too. The whole area was shaped like a long strip, but contained all the fertile riverbank land plus mountain timber resources. Strategically and economically, it was incredibly valuable, 3 times the size of Wanwang County. I told them once the water fortress was rebuilt, they'd station there under Wujiang, fishing for a living. Come spring, we'd survey the surrounding farmland for them to rent, with regular taxes due. Housing at the fortress would be free. In return, since they all had some fighting experience, they'd be expected to help defend Shinha Crossing when needed. They agreed instantly and started discussing when to move their people over. Then one leader raised a concern. They were nearly out of food, the mountains were snowed in, and the river was frozen. How were they supposed to survive winter? They asked to borrow grain. I smiled and told them frozen rivers don't stop fishing. You just need the right technique. They looked at me like I was crazy. I explained the method. First, bang on the ice repeatedly. Fish swim near the surface in winter because oxygen is thin below, so the noise drives them around and exhausts them. Once they're tired and used to the sound, chisel small holes in the ice spaced about 10 feet apart, just big enough for a net. For daily use, drill even smaller holes for ice fishing and cover them with branches afterward to prevent refreezing. The 5 leaders were amazed. They'd lost men trying to fish in winter before and never caught much. They knelt before me in gratitude and insisted on giving me all their catch beyond what they needed to eat. They wouldn't get up until I accepted. I could see their sincerity. These were people who'd suffered real hardship and understood the value of a single meal. I accepted their offer and told them everyone in Shinha Crossing was family now. After sending them off, I headed to Shango Village. The coming fight with Gao Lufeng was going to be tough, and I needed more soldiers. I could only pick about 30 usable fighters from Shango Village, but the 5 bandit leaders delivered. Their men had some combat skills and just needed to learn teamwork and weapons handling. 5 days later, I had a proper force assembled. The 5 leaders took over the water fortress, freeing Wang Dinglu and Zhai Shanchuan to return to the village with their 30-plus elite soldiers. These were my best troops, equipped with tower shields, bamboo spears, swords at the waist, backup short blades at the ankle, and leather armor. They were the main assault unit. Then there were the archers, 9 3-man teams led by the original 9 sharpshooters. And finally Lin Xiaoxi's guard unit, the largest group, armed with long swords, spears, siege equipment, and war carts. The archers would move between the siege weapons for cover and support. Looking at everyone lined up, I had just over 100 fighters. Not many, but with coordinated units that could work together. The weaknesses were clear though. Not enough trained horses or riders for cavalry, and armor production was too slow. Only the shield troops had leather armor. The archers and spearmen still needed more. After 5 days of daytime drilling and nighttime rest, plus a supply team from Wu Santong's escort agency, led by Wu Xiangyue, I marched the whole force straight toward Gao Lufeng's stronghold. I wasn't going to charge in like a bandit. I set up camp nearby and had everyone eat a full meal first. Gao Lufeng's scouts had spotted us the moment we left the village, and their war horns were blaring. But we just sat there eating, making no move to attack. Inside their stronghold, it was chaos. The boss had lost authority after the failed raid on my village. Losing 2 lieutenants and over 100 men had destroyed his credibility. The smaller gang leaders who joined were all eyeing his position. They argued endlessly. Some wanted to wait us out, others wanted to attack immediately, and everyone was suspicious of my intentions. Their boss finally lost patience and told them to each do what they wanted. Just probe our defenses without overcommitting. He was actually using me to solve his own problem. Let these hotheads charge out, get beaten, lose their arrogance, and then they'd finally listen to him. After that, he'd bring out his secret weapon to finish me off. Several leaders eagerly split up their forces to surround us from 4 directions. Wang Dinglu spotted their movements from a hilltop and reported exactly what I predicted, a scattered, disorganized mess. Gao Lufeng was a house divided, just as I'd expected from that night at the brothel. Getting them to fight as one was impossible. I gave the order, hit them fast, and it quickly. Our strategy was simple: strike when they're tired, retreat when they advance, chase when they retreat. My squad leaders already knew their specific roles for every scenario. The men were eager. Wang Dian could barely contain himself, gripping his bow with excitement. They all knew this battle would go our way. The enemy was walking right into our trap. Outside the camp, Wang Dinglu and Zhai Shanchuan set up the shield wall with bamboo spears ready. Lin Xiaoxi held the flanks. Archers positioned themselves in the center behind the shields. Everything was in place. When the bandits entered archer range, I gave the order. Wang Dian's 9 archers split into 3 rotating teams. one firing while the next reloaded, creating an endless rain of arrows. The 5 bandit leaders had no real tactics. They just charged uphill at us and got shredded immediately. They lost enough men in the first wave to wipe out an entire gang. After getting hammered, they finally remembered they had archers too. They pulled back and sent bowmen forward. But I'd already anticipated this. Wang Dian ordered our archers under the shields, and Lin Xiaoxi had the shield bearers raise a massive protective dome. When the bandits launched their second charge with archer support, our spearmen were ready. Wang Dinglu watched through the shield's viewing slot and called for the bamboo spears. The spinning bamboo poles did double duty. The sharpened tips slashed anyone who got close, and the rotating shafts knocked away most of their arrows from below. Barely anything got through. Only one of our men took a scratch on the shoulder from a lucky shot. The 5 bandit leaders were furious. 2 attacks, 0 results. They sent word to their boss asking him to bring out the big weapon. But their boss was sitting in his hall drinking, having expected exactly this outcome. He called them idiots and ordered an immediate retreat. He'd planned to let them fail so they'd fall in line, and it worked. They'd lost 43 dead and 38 wounded. Their strength was gutted and their morale destroyed. Meanwhile, I was leisurely cooking meat soup, not bothering to direct the battle personally. When I heard they'd retreated, I called everyone to eat. They wouldn't attack again soon. While my men ate, I unpacked the catapult parts from the supply wagons and assembled them on the hilltop. Back in their main hall, the boss was scolding the 5 leaders, who sat with their heads down, too ashamed to speak. He seized the moment to demand total command. They had no choice but to agree. He announced they'd rest and launch a night raid against us, fighting fire with fire. But just as he finished speaking and before anyone could stand up, a massive crash slammed into their roof. The first catapult stones smashed through the roof of their main hall and crushed the boss of Gao Lufeng right in the chest. Killed him instantly, nothing left but a bloody mess under a boulder. The second stone came crashing through moments later. The bandit leaders panicked and scrambled out like madmen. Once outside, they could see the stones were flying from our hilltop, landing with terrifying precision on their headquarters. They couldn't understand what kind of sorcery this was. They remembered their dead boss had mentioned such a weapon, information from Zhai Rang, but he'd never been able to build one. And now the only person who knew anything about it was a corpse under a rock. The 5 bandit leaders completely lost their will to fight. They scattered, each grabbing their own men and running for their lives. Wang Dinglu asked if we should chase them. I told him no, let cornered rats run. We'd take over the stronghold after everyone finished eating. He shook his head in amazement, saying I'd just destroyed an entire bandit fortress like it was a casual outing. Honestly, the catapult was meant as a decapitation strike. I just got lucky that the first shot hit their boss directly. The real reason it fell apart so fast was simple. Honda and Li Sanpao were already my prisoners, so nobody could rally the original Gao Lufeng fighters. The 5 smaller leaders had only joined for profit. With the boss dead, they were the first to flee. No leadership, no morale, no fight left. We walked into Gao Lufeng unopposed. Wu Santong and his escort boys loaded up everything in the storerooms. The bandits had fled without taking a single thing. I picked out several sets of leather armor for Wu Santong's escort agency. He'd been helping me for free all this time, and his men had been risking their lives alongside mine. I told him his brother's safety mattered most, and these would protect them on escort jobs. Wu Xiangyue chimed in, insisting her father take them. The old man got misty-eyed and accepted. Wu Xiangyue then started teasing her father about how he'd originally opposed our marriage. He denied it awkwardly, claiming he just didn't know me well enough at first, and that she'd been shameless throwing herself at me when we first met. They went back and forth bickering while I just smiled. Back at the village, I prepared to head to Tianyong City with Gao Lufeng's banner. I had 3 goals. First, collect the bounty. The magistrate had offered 1,000 taels for wiping out Gao Lufeng, possibly more after they'd stolen military horses. Second, the iron mine. I'd already told Wang Dinglu to scatter some corpses around the mine to make it look like we'd fought the bandits there, giving me a legitimate claim. And third, Linghu Xiaoshan. She'd asked me to eliminate Gao Lufeng, and I delivered. She was my fiancée after all. Forget rewards, I deserved at least a few kisses. My first stop in Tianyong City was the magistrate's office. With my captain's badge, the guards let me right in. Xiao Hui happened to be on duty and greeted me warmly, assuming I'd come for construction funds. I told him I was here to collect a bounty. He was confused until I mentioned Gao Lufeng. The bounty had grown to over 2,000 taels. When I pulled out their banner and said I'd wipe them out, Xiao Hui nearly fell over. He stammered that I only had 50 or 60 river guards. How could I beat 500 bandits? I played it humble, saying they'd attacked us first and we barely survived with the villagers' help, then launched a desperate counterattack before they could regroup. Just self-defense, nothing heroic. Then I dropped the bigger news. After destroying Gao Lufeng, we discovered they'd been secretly mining iron ore. I told him we'd fought their remnants at the mine site and secured it, and since iron was a strictly controlled national resource, I'd rushed here to report it immediately. Xiao Hui's brain nearly short-circuited. He ran to the inner chambers to report. Moments later, heavy footsteps came from the back, and who should appear first but Linghu Zheng, my future father-in-law. He was beaming, shouting about the iron ore before he even reached me. When I confirmed it was black iron ore, a rare and valuable type, he nearly exploded with excitement. Without even waiting for the magistrate, Linghu Zheng declared on the spot that I would oversee the mine. He said Tianyong City's Dragon Mountain Range was huge, but iron deposits were extremely scarce, let alone rare black iron. The magistrate arrived to find the decision already made. He looked at me, looked at Linghu Zheng, and clearly understood this was pure nepotism. But what could he say? Linghu Zheng outranked him in every way that mattered. The magistrate explained the proper process. Iron mining was controlled by the National Salt and Iron Bureau, overseen by a second-rank official. He'd need to report to the provincial governor's office, and inspectors would come to verify the deposit size and set production quotas. They might even send convict laborers, and auditors would check the books regularly. Linghu Zheng was thrilled. No more begging the Salt and Iron Bureau for supplies. Then he turned to the magistrate and pushed even harder, pointing out that I'd eliminated Gao Lufeng, a long-standing threat to the entire region, and discovered a strategic mineral deposit. He praised the magistrate's brilliant foresight in appointing me and strongly suggested a reward was in order. The magistrate's face tightened. More rewards? He was running out of things to give. The magistrate was clearly unhappy. In no time at all, I'd gone from a village chief to a river crossing captain with iron mine oversight. Two incredibly lucrative positions. And now Linghu Zheng was pushing for even more rewards. Linghu Zheng made his big move. He declared that given the threats facing Tianyong City, northern barbarians outside and bandits within, he was authorizing me to establish a militia force of 1,000 men. To be called the Hu Xiao Army, the Tiger Roar Army. The magistrate nearly choked. Militias had existed throughout the dynasty's history, usually controlled by local strongmen who funded them independently. With enough military achievements, a militia leader could even be granted noble titles. But the key requirement was official approval from the local magistrate. Without it, raising troops was rebellion. Linghu Zheng had framed it perfectly. It was for the people's safety, for Tianyong City's security. As the garrison commander during wartime, his military authority was unquestionable. He outranked the magistrate. His family had been stationed here for generations by imperial decree, and Zhang Yuanzhong was just a rotating official who'd be transferred in a few years. The magistrate had no ground to stand on. He forced a smile and agreed, swallowing his bitterness. His role in the whole meeting boiled down to two things: agree and pay. I collected the bounty, pocketed the silver notes, and rode with Linghu Zheng to his estate. On the way, he explained why the iron mine mattered so much. By imperial law, all locally mined iron had to be sent to the provincial governor, who forwarded it to the Salt and Iron Bureau. When the local government needed iron back, they could only request up to 50%. 20% went to national reserves and 30% was redistributed elsewhere. Tianyong City had almost no iron deposits, so they'd been constantly groveling to the Bureau for scraps. My discovery would ease the shortage considerably. Once smelted, the iron would equip the entire city garrison, and some would flow back to me. With the militia authorization, I could arm my forces openly. I was thrilled. I had my own army now, and I didn't need to steal iron or any more. At the Linghu estate, Linghu Zheng dismissed all the servants and took me to his study. His tone turned deadly serious. He asked if I understood why he'd authorized the Tiger Roar Army. I guessed it was to clear the surrounding bandits, so Xiaoshan's Fengling army could focus on the northern barbarians. He shook his head. That wasn't the real reason. He said there were secrets known only to a few high-ranking officials in the capital, secrets directly tied to the Linghu family's survival and Xiaoshan's life. I tensed up immediately. He began talking about his family's history, generations of border service, countless military achievements, putting down the rebellion in Yuzhou. I could read between the lines. The rebellion was the old Wei Kingdom's resistance forces. The Linghu family had crushed them, which was why Yuzhou was so peaceful now, while neighboring Yinzhou still had problems. But whatever he was about to reveal next clearly weighed heavily on him. This wasn't just history. Something dangerous was coming. Linghu Zheng continued his story. By the time power passed to him, the Linghu family's military strength had been whittled down to just 3,000 soldiers, a shadow of their peak when they commanded 100,000. The current emperor, known as the Shunned Emperor, was behind it all. Then he dropped a bombshell. The Shunned Emperor wasn't the rightful heir. He'd seized the throne through a conspiracy, the Eastern Palace incident. The previous emperor had left 8 senior eunuchs and 4 regents to guide the true successor, but the new emperor had systematically purged them all. Linghu Zheng sighed and said the Linghu family had survived because they'd always been loyal to the dynasty itself, not to any individual ruler. So instead of being destroyed, they were just weakened. The emperor created the Fengling army and gave it to Xiaoshan to command, a way to keep the Linghu family useful but under control. But Linghu Zheng saw through it. Xiaoshan was a Linghu, but Nangong Qiushui was the emperor's creation. The implications worried him deeply. That's why he wanted me to build the Tiger Roar army. It wasn't about clearing bandits. It was about creating a safety net for Xiaoshan and the entire Linghu family. If things went wrong, my army would be their last line of defense. He gave me his personal family token for free access to the military camp. I understood completely. This militia was essentially the Linghu family's dowry and their insurance policy. I promised I wouldn't let him down. The Tiger Roar army banner was ready when I left. Identical to Tianyong City's standard military flags, just with different characters. Smart. It showed we were still under the city's authority, giving us legitimacy. I rode to the Fengling army camp and walked straight into the command tent. Xiaoshan was in full battle armor, the first time I'd seen her dressed for war. She looked stunning and formidable. She seemed a bit embarrassed and had her maid help remove the armor in front of me, changing into regular clothes. She shared critical intelligence. The spy, her former maid, had been dealt with. Long Ju had escorted the informant to the capital to report to the emperor. Once the emperor investigated, the northern barbarian supply lines would be cut within days. Without food, they'd be forced to attack. War was coming soon. She told me all this despite it being top-secret information that even her senior officers didn't all have access to. She trusted me because I was her fiancé, because my strategies had proven valuable, and, though she didn't say it outright, because she wanted me close. I told her I'd taken care of Gao Lufeng. She barely reacted. With a massive barbarian invasion looming, a bandit gang was small news. She promised to record the achievement and petition the emperor for my reward. Then she steered the conversation toward what she really wanted, my help against the barbarians. When I finally agreed to discuss it, she pulled out a jar filled with iron pellets and nails, shrapnel extracted from the assassins my grenades had killed. "I want these," she said. "No, absolutely not," I replied immediately. It wasn't that I didn't want to help. I simply couldn't mass-produce grenades. My gunpowder supply was too limited. She got upset, asking if it was because we weren't married yet, or because of her identity. She accused me of not caring about the Empire's suffering. I smiled helplessly and told her the truth. I genuinely didn't have any right now. She deflated like a balloon and asked quietly whether they were gone forever or just temporarily unavailable. Couldn't I make more? Xiaoshan and her officers had studied the grenade shrapnel for days. They believed it could turn the tide of battle. She'd been drilling her troops, fully expecting me to help. She'd even prepared herself to agree to any condition I named, including sleeping with me before our wedding. So when I kept shaking my head, she crumbled. The situation was dire. 30,000 barbarians camped outside the city with 20,000 more in reserve. Once the emperor cut their supply lines, 50,000 desperate soldiers would launch an all-out attack. She'd pushed for this plan herself, and now there was no turning back. I told her even if I had grenades, they weren't suitable for her army. They were fragile clay pots that could shatter from a bump during a march and kill her own troops. They were a stopgap weapon, nothing more. My real goal was muskets firing in formation and eventually cannons. Thousands of them if I could afford it. Her eyes lit up. "So you have something better?" I nodded. She jumped up excitedly. then saw my serious face and deflated again. "What's your condition?" I looked at her and dropped the transaction talk entirely. My only condition was that she come back from this war alive. I told her we were husband and wife. No more deals between us. I loved her, and I didn't want her to make me worry. She froze. Something shifted behind her eyes. For a moment, she just stared at me, processing the fact that I genuinely cared about her, not as a bargaining chip, but as my future wife. I changed the subject to give her space. I asked about her battles with the barbarians. She laid out the problem. The barbarians' greatest strength was cavalry. Over 10,000 skilled riders on horses that were smaller, but far more agile and durable than ours. Her foundling army had fewer than 2,000 cavalry. Their horses had better burst speed, but terrible stamina. They couldn't chase or escape. So she was trapped behind city walls, afraid to fight in the open. I told her I designed something specifically to neutralize their cavalry. I drew up plans for caltrops, simple iron spikes arranged so that no matter how they landed, at least one point always faced up. Scatter them across the barbarian cavalry's path, and horse hooves would be punctured. Even if the spike didn't fully penetrate, it would cause the hoof to slip and injure the ankle. Most barbarian horses didn't even have horseshoes, making them even more vulnerable. She looked at my drawing skeptically. It was just a small iron thing with 6 spikes. I explained further. They were simple to mass produce using casting molds. And for maximum effect, soak them in sewage and manure before use. The filth would cause wound infections. Within days, both horses and riders would develop festering wounds that couldn't be treated. On a large scale, it could even trigger plague-like outbreaks, destroying their fighting strength from within. She grabbed a brush and started writing everything down frantically. When I mentioned bacteria, tiny invisible creatures that cause rot and disease, she was both fascinated and horrified. I decided not to explain that bacteria live on human skin too. If I did, she'd probably scrub herself raw in the bath tonight. Xiaoshan didn't doubt what I told her about caltrops. She just couldn't figure out how I knew things that weren't in any military book she'd read. I told her caltrops could also be combined with horse-trapping pits and used against infantry too. She could work out those details herself. She raised a practical concern. The foundling army was desperately short of iron. They barely had enough to maintain their existing weapons. I suggested collecting iron from civilians. Every blacksmith had spare stock, and ordinary families had old broken tools. Just explain it's for fighting the barbarians, and people would donate willingly. Her eyes lit up. Even 1 gene per household across the whole city would add up to an enormous amount. She sighed and said if she had someone like me as her military advisor, the barbarians wouldn't stand a chance. I laughed and told her if I were really her strategist, the foundling army wouldn't even need to exist. That kind of talent was exactly what emperors feared most. She got offended, defending her soldiers as elite fighters. I told her to go ahead and take her 5,000 out to fight 30,000 barbarians then. She went quiet. Then I offered her something bigger, bed crossbows. 12 massive siege weapons with a range of over 500 paces. For comparison, normal bows maxed out at 100 paces, maybe 120 shooting downward from walls. 500 paces meant her bolts could hit the barbarians before their cavalry even started charging. I set 2 conditions. No blueprints, no copying by her craftsmen. I'd lend her 12 units, and after the battle, she'd return them. Her mind immediately started scheming. She offered to petition the emperor to buy them. Even half the national treasury would be worth it. I shut that down hard. Technology leaking out would eventually harm ordinary people. Wars always hurt civilians the most. When she kept pushing, I threatened to cancel the loan entirely. She backed off instantly. I softened my tone and told her not to worry. After this battle, I'd have even more powerful weapons to share. But right now, with spies potentially everywhere, keeping the technology secret was essential. She remembered the carnage my grenades had caused and let the matter go. We finally talked about Gao Lufeng. The stolen military horses had been in rough shape, many dead or injured. I'd brought the healthy ones to my ranch for care. Xiaoshan didn't press the issue since they'd eventually returned to the foundling army. As for the bed crossbows, Gao Lufeng's dead boss had built an incomplete prototype based on Zhai Rang's stolen observations. I'd already handed the project to Carpenter Zhuzi to build proper versions. Before I left, Xiaoshan asked me to keep clearing bandits and barbarian outposts around Tianyong City while she prepared for the main battle. Whatever I captured, I could keep. Building a militia was one thing. Finding 1,000 men was another. Even combining all the bandits I'd recruited and every able-bodied man in Shina Crossing, I'd barely hit 500. Wu Jiang had an idea. He told me about a place called the Pigpen Camp, down south in Yuzhou, where refugees and defeated soldiers from the Yenzhou War were being sold like livestock. The operation had been running for years with corrupt officials involved, buying and selling people, training assassins, even diverting criminals who should have been executed. The slaves were cheap, and there were thousands of young, strong men available. I decided immediately. We left that afternoon, 5 of us riding hard down the main road. 3 days later, we reached the area near the camp and settled into an inn for the night. That evening, I pulled Wu Jiang aside. I wanted to know about the 8 grand eunuchs and 4 regent ministers that Linghu Zheng had mentioned. The politics of the capital had seemed distant before, but now I was tied to the Linghu family and Shaoshan. I needed to understand the power landscape. Wu Jiang grew serious. He explained that the shunned emperor's seizure of the throne was an open secret. The first regent minister, a man surnamed Li, hadn't been a typical court official. He was the director of the Imperial Observatory. Despite holding a seemingly modest title, everyone feared him. He'd studied the stars and discovered a celestial anomaly. Someone carrying the dynasty's fate, possibly someone who could reshape its destiny, had been born into the world. When Li reported this to the emperor, the shunned emperor, insecure about his illegitimate claim to the throne, immediately tried to execute him for spreading demonic prophecies. Other officials intervened and saved his life, but he was forced into exile. Wu Jiang added that if the person Li spoke of ever appeared, the emperor would certainly have them killed too. A chill ran down my spine. Observing the heavens, I'd heard those exact words before. The mysterious old man who'd given me my dagger back in Siwa village had said the same thing. He died without revealing much, just telling me to take care of myself. Could that unremarkable old man have been the great director Li himself, the most powerful of the 4 regent ministers? It made sense now. His secrecy, his cryptic warnings, his refusal to say too much. A man hiding from an emperor who wanted him dead. And the person the stars predicted, the one carrying the dynasty's destiny. I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly who that was supposed to be. I thought about the silk pouch the old man had given me, the one that saved my life at the county office when Wang Chongxing tried to frame me. But now I realized it was dangerous to keep. If anyone connected it to the former director Li of the Imperial Observatory, it could get me killed. I made a decision and handed it to Wu Jiang. I told him it had saved my life once and could save his too, but he must never open it. Wu Jiang didn't need to open it. One glance at the fabric and the embroidered hook symbol told him everything. That material was reserved for royalty, and the hook was Director Li's personal insignia. His authority token had carried the same mark. Wu Jiang understood immediately why Li had given it to me. The old man believed I was the person from his celestial prophecy, the one carrying the dynasty's fate. Wu Jiang laughed and said he'd chosen to follow the right man. He tucked the pouch into his belt without hesitation. By giving it to him, I was making Wu Jiang my stand-in. If anyone came looking for the person Director Li had chosen, they'd find Wu Jiang, not me. I could operate from behind the scenes. It was also a test of trust. Accepting that pouch meant putting his life on the line. He took it without blinking, which meant he'd fully committed himself to me. We drank together late into the night. No more words were needed. The next morning, we rode to the slave camp. It was officially called Watermoon Fortress, hidden deep in the mountains with a narrow road connecting it to the main highway. The 5-li path to the entrance had over a dozen guard posts, and the compound was surrounded by high walls and wooden fences. No slave could escape. At the gate, they checked us and inspected our silver before letting us in. I'd brought 2,000 taels in bank notes, not the biggest spender there, but enough to get VIP treatment. Inside was horrifying. Screams filled the air. Through corridor windows, I saw naked men strapped to wooden frames while handlers pressed red-hot branding irons into their skin, burning the character for slave into their flesh. Once marked, their fate was sealed forever. The manager smiled and led me past, apologizing for the untrained new arrivals. He walked me toward rows of wooden buildings, asking what kind of slaves I wanted. He boasted about their selection: obedient women trained to serve men, all virgins, ready to use immediately. He was confident every buyer left with female slaves, and once they had women, they'd want male servants too. I looked away. I felt sorry for these people, refugees, kidnapped victims, people forced into slavery. But I wasn't a saint. I couldn't save everyone. All I could do was hope that someday, when I had enough power, I could give more people a decent life. For now, I couldn't. I told the manager I needed strong men, several hundred of them, for guards. His eyes lit up and his smile widened. A buyer wanting hundreds of slaves meant a mountain of silver. The manager led me toward rows of trained slaves, boasting they were 5 taels each. I nearly laughed. Outside, desperate families were selling children for 1 tael, and Zhang Irma used to trade a bucket of grain for a young woman. I told him the price was too high, especially in a disaster year with poor sales. He immediately backtracked, dropping to 3 taels with fake apologies about confusing individual and bulk pricing. I held up 1 finger. 1 tael each. His face twisted. He'd never seen someone cut a price that ruthlessly. He tried the guilt angle, talking about training costs and how they fed these slaves meat. Meat? In a place called the pig pen? I almost laughed again. I told him flatly, this was my final offer, take it or leave it. He could see I was a big buyer who wasn't going to budge. His expression shifted. He led me towards some rundown shacks at the edge of the compound. Inside were slaves they couldn't tame. No amount of torture broke them. Wild, incredibly strong, with teeth like animals. He said if I could handle them, they were mine cheap. He unlocked a heavy wooden door. The stench hit me like a wall. From the darkness came a roar that barely sounded human. Inside, a young man was gripping the bars of a wooden cage, shaking them violently, howling with rage. He was covered in filth, hair matted, hands and limbs chained with iron. Clearly a dangerous one. I understood immediately. These were wild tribesmen from the Liaodong region. The camp couldn't train them, but killing strong specimens felt wasteful, so they just locked them up. Now the manager saw a chance to dump them on me. I looked through the tangled hair and saw fierce, sharp eyes. This was exactly what I needed. Let him out, I said. The manager panicked. He said this one needed a dozen men to hold down and was vicious. I repeated myself. He looked at me like I was insane. I called Zhai Shanchuan forward and told him to test the kid once he was free. Zhai Shanchuan grinned. He was a brute himself and was eager to match strength. The guards prepared nervously, gripping chains and weapons. They looped a rope around the young man's neck and dragged him out. He tumbled to the ground, then ripped the rope off with a roar. His eyes locked onto the manager, clearly the one who'd tortured him most. The manager scrambled behind his guards, threatening to kill the boy if he didn't behave. I snatched the keys from the manager's belt and tossed them at the young man's feet. Everyone thought I'd lost my mind, but the boy was smart. He grabbed the keys and unlocked every chain on his body. Strangely, instead of attacking the manager, he stared at me with a confused look. He seemed to understand that I was trying to buy him, and no customer had ever done anything like this before. I called Zhai Shanchuan forward. He cracked his knuckles, walked up grinning, and beckoned the boy. Come on, kid. I'm your opponent. The young man roared and charged like a wild animal. Zhai Shanchuan caught him head-on, locking hands, and the two of them pushed against each other like bulls fighting over territory. Wu Jiang couldn't believe his eyes. This scrawny, starving kid was actually holding his ground against Zhai Shanchuan, whose strength could match 5 normal men. After a brief standoff, Zhai Shanchuan roared, planted his feet, and flipped the boy to the ground. Fair enough. The kid had never eaten a proper meal here. But then the boy did something incredible. The instant he hit the ground, he kicked both legs up, hooked himself onto Zhai Shanchuan's head, and slammed a fist down on top of it. Zhai Shanchuan staggered back, blood dripping from his nose. He'd only been using a fraction of his strength and had underestimated the kid completely. The boy grinned at him, bearing a mouth full of sharpened fangs. Every tooth had been filed to a point since childhood. His teeth were literally weapons. This was a deep mountain tribesman from the Liaodong region, not a northern barbarian. The barbarians had organized governments and armies. These were true, wild people. Zhai Shanchuan got serious, charged in, grabbed the boy by the throat with one hand, lifted him clean off the ground, and slammed him down hard. A few devastating punches later, the boy was coughing and finally overwhelmed. But the moment Zhai Shanchuan stepped back, the kid scrambled up, snarled, and glared at him defiantly. Absolutely fearless. I walked toward the boy myself. The manager panicked, screaming for someone to stop me. Zhai Shanchuan just smiled and told him not to worry. He said my fighting skills were 10 times his own, and I could handle 30 or 50 of these kids at once. The manager didn't believe a word of it. I crouched down, looked the boy in the eyes, and let my killing intent wash over him. He froze. Fighting Zhai Shanchuan, he'd felt outmatched but defiant. My gaze was different. It made him feel like death was one finger twitch away. No need to fight. That pressure alone crushed every thought in his head except survival. After a moment, he nodded slowly. Language didn't matter. Between my words, gestures, and presence, he understood. Follow me and eat full meals, or stay here and die. Simple choice. This boy was their leader. When he barked some commands into the dark building, over 100 wild tribesmen filed out obediently, completely tame. I had the manager bring food and water for all of them. Beyond the tribesmen, I reluctantly bought another batch of trained slaves at 2 taels each. They were obedient but terrified of the wild ones. I had to rent prison carts and guards from Watermoon Fortress just to transport everyone safely. I was satisfied. The numbers were still short of 1,000, but the quality was exceptional. The tribesmen would become killing machines on the battlefield with minimal training, and the trained men could become heavy cavalry once armored. But less than an hour after leaving the fortress, the young tribesman started shaking his cage violently and howling. I stopped the guards from whipping him and rode over to ask what was wrong. He made desperate sounds, and suddenly rustling came from every direction. Dozens of figures emerged from the grass and trees. Primitive warriors with stone-tipped spears, animal skin clothing, and faces painted in wild colors. They stared at the prison carts with murderous eyes. These wild people had us completely surrounded. Primitive warriors with stone spears, animal skin clothes, and painted faces. The guards from Watermoon Fortress panicked instantly. I shouted for everyone to stay calm. The tribesmen couldn't attack recklessly because their 100 kinsmen were still locked in our prison carts. Then the young leader lowered his voice, calmed his people, brushed the hair from his face, and struggled to speak. Release me. It's okay. So he could actually talk. I smiled and unlocked his cage. He jumped out, comforted his caged tribesmen, then bounded away like a monkey to meet his people. Wu Jiang rode up worried about losing 100 taels worth of slaves. I wasn't concerned. I had preparations. I pulled out one of my grenades. Wu Jiang had no idea what it was, just a small clay pot. I told him it was called a hand thunder, and one could take out dozens of them. He took me literally and nearly shook with fear. In this era, people didn't understand lightning and thunder terrified everyone at a primal level. When I casually said mine was even more powerful than real thunder, the way he looked at me changed completely. Good. If my own people were intimidated, the enemy would be too. Arguing erupted in the distance. The boy came back with an older man, clearly his father. The chief wore a tiger skin, carried a bone knife made from wild boar leg, and had fox and wolf tails hanging from his spear. He glared at me with nothing but rage in his eyes. The boy stuttered out that they wanted to trade their most precious possession, the chief's tiger skin, for their people's freedom. The tiger skin was their tribe's symbol of honor and identity. The chief was already reaching to remove it. I refused flatly. The tiger skin had a price. These warriors were priceless. I told the boy they were my property now. I'd paid for them. Their tribesmen needed to leave, or they'd all die. The boy understood and tried to explain to his father. The boy respected me as a strong warrior. In their culture, strength earned respect, and disputes between warriors were settled with honor. But the chief saw that we were outnumbered and wanted to take his people by force. That must have been what they'd been arguing about. When the chief heard my answer, his fury exploded. He raised his weapon and his entire tribe readied their arrows. The chief drew his bone knife, let out a war cry, and charged at me. The boy grabbed him around the waist, trying to hold him back. Zhai Shanchuan reacted instantly, grabbing Wu Jiang and pulling him to safety. Smart move, since Wu Jiang couldn't fight. He knew I didn't need protection. The situation erupted. Arrows started flying like rain. I ducked behind a prison cart, pulled out my fire striker and a grenade, lit the fuse, and threw it toward them by instinct. My improved grenades had shorter fuses now. They practically exploded on impact. The blast behind me was deafening. Horses screamed, tribesmen howled. Even Wu Jiang and Zhai Shanchuan were shaking from the noise. I threw 2 more for good measure. The second and third explosions killed several warriors outright. This wasn't just about fighting them off. It was about breaking their spirit. If I didn't crush their defiance now, they'd never be controllable. The chief wailed over his fallen people. The boy stepped forward, struggling with the words, "Stop. We surrender." I stood up slowly. Smoke drifted across a silent battlefield. Every single person, caged tribesmen, wild warriors in the trees, guards, drivers, was flat on the ground trembling. The chief and his son knelt before me. In their eyes, I was a god. The boy crawled to my feet, hands folded, begging forgiveness. We were wrong. Great God, please don't punish us. I grabbed his hair and pulled his head up. I'm not a god, but I'm more powerful than any god you worship. Obey and live well. Resist and die. Understand? He nodded frantically, ran to his father, then came back. Our chief asked you to grant us land, to live on. Our whole tribe will follow you. I asked how many people they had. He pointed at the prison carts, over 200 people, and held up 4 fingers. For times that, around 800 to 1,000 people. A large tribe. I agreed. Land was the one thing I had plenty of. Their warriors would serve me, and their people could sustain themselves while contributing resources. It was too good to pass up. We arranged for the chief to take the wounded and dead back to their territory, while a few scouts would follow me to inspect the new settlement. The chief also made an important decision. Since he brought divine punishment upon his people by not listening to his son, he stepped down as chief on the spot and passed leadership to the boy. I ordered the surviving water moon guards and drivers to keep their mouths shut about everything they'd seen. With the tribesmen now completely obedient, we didn't need the prison carts anymore. The other 100-plus trained slaves were too terrified to make a sound. I marched nearly 300 people back to the village, arriving 2 days later. I gave the tribe the land between Shango Village and the Water Fortress, riverfront territory with farmland, mountains, and hunting forests. Then, without resting, I hit the road again. There were 4 major slave camps across Yuzhou. I visited them all, buying until I'd assembled 700 men. The remaining 300 came from the tribal warriors. 1,000 soldiers total. During training, I discovered something incredible about the tribesmen. They were naturally gifted, immense strength, fearless on horseback, and deadly accurate with bows. I'd avoided cavalry training because it normally took too long, but these people mounted horses as naturally as breathing. Their riding skills rivaled the northern barbarians. Combined with their savage fighting instinct, they'd be unstoppable on a battlefield. I gave the order. From now on, everything the tribesmen did, every drill, every exercise, would be done on horseback. Eating and sleeping were the only exceptions. I ordered Tian Laoba to pick out 300 battle-ready horses from the ranch, 1 for each tribesman. I never imagined my dream of building a cavalry would come together like this. These hunters already knew how to coordinate and surround prey as a group, so I barely needed to teach them tactics. I just gave orders, and they figured out the rest. After 2 or 3 days of training, they were already better than ordinary cavalry. A few days later, the chief arrived with the entire tribe, over 1,000 people including women, children, and elderly. They were happy with the land I'd assigned them. Their arrival pushed Shinha Crossing's population to its highest point yet. Feeding everyone was becoming a serious problem, especially the 700 slave soldiers who depended entirely on me. Thankfully, the 5 bandit leaders at the water fortress had started ice fishing using my method and sent over 200 jin of fish on the first day alone. They kept their word. After feeding themselves, everything else came to me. I needed to get this 1,000-man army battle-ready fast, then sweep the surrounding bandits and barbarian camps to restock our food and weapons. The next day, I went to check on the bed crossbows. Carpenter Juzi had finished all 12, working shirtless in the winter cold. He'd wrapped them in tree bark so nobody could study the construction. The yard was piled high with them. With these 12 machines, Xiaoshan could shred any cavalry charge from 500 paces. More than enough for defense. I'd also told Juzi to find himself a wife. He'd picked one and was embarrassed but grateful. I gave him 2 days off, then told him to start making more tower shields and spears for the new militia. As I left the workshop, I spotted a rider in Fengling army armor galloping toward the village with Wang Dingliu's men leading the way. The rider fell off his horse halfway there. When they brought him closer, I saw why. 6 arrows stuck in his body, all snapped off but still bleeding badly. A tough soldier to have ridden this far. He gasped out his message. General Longju was being chased and needed rescue, about 10 li west in the forest. Longju was supposed to be in the capital delivering Xiaoshan's letter to the emperor. If someone was hunting her on the way back, it could be agents of the Grand Eunuchs or the regent ministers. I sent Wang Dinglu racing to the water fortress for reinforcements, had 2 men carry the wounded soldier to my father-in-law for treatment, then rode straight to the horse ranch. Minutes later, I charged out of the village with 300 tribal cavalry behind me like a flood. This would be the Tiger Roar Army's first battle. I wanted to see what kind of enemy would serve as my cavalry's practice targets. Riding alongside the young tribal chief, I kept drilling one point into him. Save the injured side, capture enemies alive if possible, and don't kill the wrong people. I was terrified he'd charge in and accidentally cut down Long Ju. He grinned and said, "I know. Good people, bad people. I understand." I had to trust him. What else could I do? We reached the forest near the water fortress quickly. Bodies lay scattered at the tree line, but everything was eerily quiet. Long Ju must have fought deeper into the woods. I was about to plan our approach when I turned and saw the young chief had already drawn his sword, pointed toward the trees, and barked a command. All 300 riders instantly fanned out and swept into the forest in a surrounding formation, without me saying a word. The cavalry charged into the forest carrying the first batch of weapons from our blacksmith, a new saber I designed called the Hua Dao, thicker spine, lighter blade, devastating cutting power that could split leather armor in one strike. Usable single-handed on horseback or two-handed on foot. The young tribal chief served as their cavalry general. I followed them in, worried they might not recognize Long Ju's people and cut them down by mistake. A few li deep in the forest, Long Ju was in bad shape, covered in blood, multiple sword wounds, barely standing. She'd only survived thanks to a thin inner armor vest under her clothes. 2 injured guards were dragging her along while a dozen black-clad assassins closed in from behind. She'd started with 10 guards, sent 2 ahead to find me, and had the other 8 stay behind to buy her time. She was trying to get her remaining guards to run with the Emperor's handwritten decree, something critical to the entire army, but they refused to leave her. Then my cavalry arrived. The tribesmen swept in from multiple directions, cutting down the assassins with brutal efficiency. One slash took a head clean off. Another took an arm. Long Ju and her guards were stunned. They had no idea where these fearsome riders had come from. The guards noticed the horses had Fengling army gear, which confused them even more. I rode up last, spear in hand. Long Ju nearly cried with relief when she saw me. She couldn't understand how I'd assembled a wild tribe cavalry force, something the previous emperor himself had tried and failed to do. I got her onto a horse and rushed her to my father-in-law for treatment. As for her question about her other guards, I couldn't answer yet. I was afraid the tribesmen might have accidentally killed some friendlies in the chaos. I ordered the entire cavalry to sweep a 10-li radius around the forest, making sure no assassin escaped. Wang Dinglu arrived late with the water fortress troops, so I had them clean up the battlefield. Back at the village, we'd saved 7 of Long Ju's people total, including the 2 messengers, 2 rescued guards, Long Ju herself, and her 2 remaining escorts. The dead guards' bodies were brought back for proper burial. I'd send them with tomorrow's bed crossbow delivery team. Most of the assassins had been hacked to pieces by the tribesmen. 8 were brought back alive and tied up. After getting her wounds treated, Long Ju limped over to me on a crutch. She had one burning question: how on earth had I tamed a wild tribe? Long Ju kept pressing me about the tribal cavalry. She knew how powerful they were and was already scheming to recruit more for the Fengling army. I told her it was just luck. She didn't believe me for a second and threatened to report everything to the general. That gave me an idea. She loved tattling. She'd set me up at the brothel before, and now she wanted to run to Xiaoshan again. So when she leaned in eagerly for my secret method, I rattled off a long string of Fujin dialect. Her brain completely short-circuited. She had no clue what I'd said. She begged me to repeat it. I put on a serious face and told her a general should understand that military secrets are only spoken once. Did Xiaoshan repeat herself for her? I told her to go back and report exactly what I'd said. If the method was followed, every wild tribe across the empire could be brought under control. She actually believed me and started racking her brain trying to remember gibberish she'd never understand. I nearly burst out laughing walking away. Good luck explaining that one to Xiaoshan. The next morning, Fengling army troops arrived. About 300 soldiers led by General Zhongli Mei himself, here to collect the bed crossbows. Xiaoshan clearly took this seriously to send one of her top commanders. Zhongli Mei had been waiting half an hour by the time I dragged myself out of bed. Last night had been a marathon with my wives. I didn't finish until dawn. He was visibly annoyed. I didn't care. Coming to my territory asking for my weapons and giving me attitude? That's not how you treat a host, especially one doing you a favor. He asked if the weapons were ready, trying to hide his irritation. I told him to follow me. At the carpenter's workshop, He watched the 12-bed crossbows being loaded onto carts. Then I asked why he'd brought so many troops. He explained that northern barbarian scouts had spotted him leaving the city. Their patrols would likely harass him on the way back. The barbarians clearly had spies inside the city monitoring the Fengling army's movements. I offered my cavalry as escort. Zhongli glanced at me skeptically. He said his own riders were elite veterans. He was worried my men would slow them down. Not rudely, but the meaning was clear. He didn't think village militia could keep up with real soldiers. I smiled and told him I had 300 cavalry ready to go. His expression changed instantly. He agreed, but made his battle plan clear. If they ran into the barbarian army, he'd hold the enemy while I took the crossbows and ran. He obviously didn't believe my rabble could actually fight. In his mind, training villagers to stay on a horse without falling off would already be an achievement. I didn't argue. My real concern was making sure those 12 crossbows didn't fall into enemy hands. Then I told him I had one more matter to discuss. I told Zhongli about rescuing Long Ju from the assassins. He was grateful. Long Ju was the eldest of the 4 generals, and they were close. He agreed she should stay at my village to recover while he took the emperor's decree back. Before we set out, I'd given the young tribal chief a proper name. His tribe worshipped wolves as their totem, so I named him Lu Lang, Wolf, with my own surname. He was now officially my cavalry general. When Zhongli saw my 300 riders were all wild tribesmen, he was stunned. He admitted they looked skilled on horseback, but still doubted their real combat ability. I told him not to worry. We formed up, Fengling army in front, my cavalry behind, flanks covered, and moved onto the main road. Past Wenhuang County, Zhongli halted the column. Something felt wrong. He suspected an ambush ahead on the wide road leading to Tianyong City. I listened carefully. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no animals. I confirmed there were definitely enemies hidden in the trees. Zhongli looked surprised that I could read a battlefield, not just plan strategy. He asked what we should do. I laid it out. The surrounding brush was too thin to hide horses, so the ambush in the trees had to be archers. Their cavalry would be waiting further ahead. My plan was to take my riders around behind the archers, wipe them out, then we'd hit the enemy cavalry from both sides. Zhongli agreed with the plan, but balked at taking orders from me. He wanted to be the one flanking while I stayed as bait. I stared at him like he was an idiot. The barbarians had been watching him. They knew his army's armor and markings. If I sat in the open instead, they'd immediately get suspicious and wouldn't take the bait. My cavalry was unknown to them. That was the advantage. He turned red, admitted I was right, and agreed to follow my signal. But he still added that if my newly formed troops got in trouble, I should retreat and leave the rest to him. I didn't bother responding. I rode off with Lu Lang and split the cavalry into 2 groups, sweeping into the forest from opposite sides. These weren't dense woods, just patches of brush that my riders could tear through in minutes. Lu Lang's men hit like lightning. The barbarian archers hidden in the trees had 0 time to react. My cavalry's new weapon made the difference, throwing javelins, designed to match the tribesmen's hunting instincts. They hurled them with terrifying accuracy, each one finding its target. Barbarian archers were impaled and sent flying before they could even turn around. Those who managed to reach for their bows had their heads split open by Hua Dao sabers before they could draw. The entire forest ambush was destroyed in moments. There were at least 500 barbarian archers hidden in those woods. But the first wave of javelin throws wiped out most of them, and the cavalry charge with sabers finished off another 100. The rest were trampled or scattered. Zhongli was watching from a distance, itching for action, waiting for my signal that never came. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. My riders, barely days into training, were obliterating elite barbarian troops. His own battle-hardened cavalry probably couldn't match them. Meanwhile, I was strolling through the forest on foot, leading my horse like I was on a nature walk. I deliberately let my cavalry handle everything without calling Zhongli in. He'd looked down on my soldiers, so I wanted him to watch and really think about whether his Fengling army riders could stand against my wolf cavalry. After about 15 minutes, the forest was cleared. Lu Lang chased down the stragglers while I rode back to Zhongli. He was still exactly where I'd told him to stay, disciplined. I'll give him that. He asked where my signal had been. I smiled and told him I'd forgotten in all the excitement. Then I added that I'd thought about calling him, but since I was just a lowly village chief, ordering a 3rd-rank imperial general around might upset him. So I decided to clear the path myself instead. That stung. He went quiet, then bowed and apologized sincerely for being narrow-minded. When I offered him the next fight, barbarian cavalry waiting ahead, and said I wasn't the type to hog glory, he apologized again and asked me to fight alongside him this time. He even promised the Fengling army would take care of my riders' families if any were lost. Now that was the right attitude. We cleaned up the battlefield, collected weapons and arrows, then pushed forward together. 100-odd barbarian cavalry appeared ahead. We crushed them easily. My riders came through virtually untouched, a few scratches at most. Scouts reported another 500 barbarian riders trailing us, but keeping their distance. I told Lu Lang to ignore them unless they attacked. Getting those crossbows to camp was the priority. Zhongli Mei and I agreed to push through without stopping. We rode through the night with torches and reached Tianyong City by dawn. After briefing Linghu Zheng on the road situation, we rushed the 12-bed crossbows straight to the Fengling army camp. Inside the command tent, Zhongli Mei dropped to his knees before Xiaoshan, presented the emperor's decree, and declared he'd committed an offense. Xiaoshan was confused. He'd completed the mission successfully. He glanced at me, then told her everything honestly. How he'd been arrogant, underestimated my cavalry, and nearly jeopardized the operation. He didn't have to confess. I never would have told her. I respected him for that. All 4 of her generals were exceptional people. Xiaoshan sentenced him to 50 strikes and 1 month's pay docked. Then her eyes softened as she turned to me. She fired off questions. Was my tribal cavalry really that fierce? What about the javelin tactics? Were they my invention? Could I demonstrate? Any casualties? I told her my men were fine and just smiled without answering the rest. She realized she'd rattled off too many questions at once and caught herself with a small smile. She suggested we go look at the bed crossbows first. Zhongli Mei jumped up eagerly, pulled open the tent flap, and led the way out. At the Fengling Army Training Ground, I personally assembled one of the bed crossbows and prepared to demonstrate. The base was already built as one piece. I just needed to attach the bow arms using mortise and tenon joints, then pull the massive lever. Wooden gears clicked into place as the giant crossbow spread open. The bolts I'd made weren't ordinary arrows. Each one was as thick as an arm, over 3 meters long, with a sharpened axe-cut tip. Zhongli Mei stared with his mouth open. That arrow could serve as a roof beam. Xiaoshan was fascinated by the gear mechanism. The loading system is surprisingly effortless. They set up a straw dummy at 300 paces. I laughed. That was insulting my creation. I told them to stack 3 dense hay bales in a triangle at 500 paces, then line up 10 targets behind them. I adjusted the aim and pulled the trigger. The bolt hit with a thunderous impact. The front bale exploded into the air. All 3 were destroyed, and the 10 targets behind them were swept away and shattered by the remaining force. One bolt turned the entire field into a mess. Zhongli Mei was speechless. He calculated that a single shot could kill over a dozen men on a real battlefield. Anyone hit would be obliterated. I loaded a second bolt. This one was special. I'd hollowed out the tip and packed it with small iron caltrops. When fired, the bolt vibrated in flight, scattering the caltrops in every direction. Anything in their path got shredded. A true wall defense weapon. Xiaoshan's eyes went wide. She'd already followed my earlier advice and had thousands of caltrops cast, plus collected donated iron from civilians. She was seeing my ideas come together in practice. Then I loaded a third bolt, hollowed out and filled with quicklime, a byproduct from iron smelting. Sealed inside, quicklime explodes on impact. It's specifically designed to blind cavalry horses and riders. When this bolt hit the target, it burst into a massive white cloud that blanketed the area for several li. Xiaoshan was surprised. Quicklime was considered a street fighter's dirty trick, not a military weapon. Zhongli Mei admitted he'd heard of people throwing it in someone's face, but weaponizing it on this scale was something only I would think of. I told them these were just test rounds. I didn't have time to manufacture ammunition for them. Their craftsmen could replicate the bolts after seeing them once. The hollow tips could be filled with quicklime, poison, chili powder, whatever they wanted. I reminded them not to show mercy to the barbarians. Just remember how those invaders burned villages and violated our border people. Xiaoshan stared at me silently. I could tell what she was thinking. She was grateful I was on her side. A man with my mind as her enemy would mean the fall of Tianyong City in minutes. Back in the tent, she insisted on recording my achievements, escorting the crossbows and killing 500 barbarian archers. I refused flatly. I knew her game. Record a merit. Give me an honorary general title. and then she'd have a legitimate excuse to take my weapons and technology. Not a chance. I asked her to take good care of Long Ju while she recovered, and said I'd send an escort when she was ready to travel. Xiaoshan thanked me sincerely. Long Ju was her most important deputy, a third-rank general decorated with countless achievements. I grinned and called her wifey, saying she didn't need to be so polite with her own husband. Her people were my people too. Her expression changed instantly. Zhongli Mei was still in the tent when I called Xiaoshan wifey. He nearly burst out laughing but quickly pretended to be staring at the ceiling. Xiaoshan was furious. I'd embarrassed her in front of her subordinate again. She reminded him about his 50 strikes, and he practically sprinted out of the tent, grateful for the excuse to escape. The moment he left, she slammed the table. But then she remembered what happened last time she got loud with me in this tent, the forced kiss, and immediately lost her nerve. She scolded me about being inappropriate in her command center. If word spread, how could she maintain authority over thousands of soldiers? I grinned and asked if she thought all my crossbows and strategies came free. Before I could make my move, a soldier announced that Generals Linghu Chongshan and Linghu Yuanshan were requesting entry. My two future brothers-in-law. Terrible timing as always. Xiaoshan told me to go meet them since they were actually here for me. She needed time alone to think about battle plans. I touched her hair gently and told her not to worry about defeating the enemy. I'd handle it. After I left, she opened the Emperor's decree. Just 4 words. Why not kill him? Her hands trembled. She'd sent a secret letter to the Emperor through Long Ju, reporting that she'd found the person Director Li had prophesied, the one carrying the dynasty's fate. She hadn't named me specifically or given details. She'd only said the person was found and under her control. Reporting was her duty as a loyal subject, but protecting me was her duty as the woman who loved me. Her plan was to let me build military achievements in the coming battle, then petition the Emperor for leniency. If it failed, she'd take the blame for deceiving the throne, a crime punishable by death. She called for guards and ordered all the captured assassins from the Wenhuan County attack to be executed immediately. Then she had them pick a suitable head, box it up, and send it to the capital by express courier to satisfy the Emperor's demand. Meanwhile, the 2 Linghu brothers walked with me through camp. They wanted to resign their 4th-rank positions in the Fengling army and join my militia as low-ranking officers. I thought they'd lost their minds. They were central commanders who could lead thousands in battle. Why trade that for a village militia with no imperial salary? They explained, as Linghu family members, they'd never be promoted beyond their current rank. The court was suspicious of their family, and if they held independent command, political enemies would attack. Their ceiling was fixed. I guessed the truth. This was their father's arrangement. They admitted it sheepishly. Linghu Zheng believed I was the only person who could protect the Linghu family if things went wrong. The brothers wanted to learn from me, grow alongside my forces, and ensure the family's survival no matter what happened to Tianyong City or Xiaoshan. I agreed to take the 2 brothers. Having experienced generals join my forces was a huge benefit. I had plenty of fighters, but few proper military leaders. Training 1,000 soldiers by myself was impossible, and these 2 were family, completely trustworthy. Eventually, I'd need reliable people to handle sensitive military projects without me doing everything personally. I warned them there'd be no salary. Sometimes I couldn't even guarantee drinking money. They laughed it off. What they really wanted was to learn from me. Somehow my militia had turned into their personal military academy. They packed up and followed me back to the village, choosing to sleep in the barracks with the regular soldiers to bond faster. Over the next few days, I had them lead training exercises, then sent them out to clear bandit camps for real combat practice. I only gave pointers without micromanaging. They were veteran battlefield commanders who improved rapidly with just a few tips. Soon I handed full control of daily operations to them. With 1,000 soldiers, we weren't a major army, but we were more than enough for the surrounding bandits and barbarian outposts. Cart after cart of supplies rolled back to the village. Weapons, provisions, filling every warehouse. We also picked up civilians and craftsmen along the way. I need plenty of both for building up Shina Crossing. New Year was approaching. Our population had passed 2,000. Every house in both villages was occupied. Mu Wanqing came in carrying new clothes she'd made for the family and asked if the men could have a few days off for the holiday. Everyone had been working nonstop for 3 months. She handed me a pair of shoes she'd made. They fit perfectly. I pulled her close, and before she could react, I slipped a jade bracelet onto her wrist. I'd found it during a raid. Exquisite quality, worth a fortune. She gasped with delight, but worried the other wives would be jealous. I told her everyone was getting one. Then I noticed we were alone in the house. One thing led to another. She protested that it was daytime, begged me to hurry before the others came home, and worried about Wu Xiangyue catching us. Lu Yin came back from an errand, heard the commotion through the door, turned bright red, and stationed herself outside as a lookout, trembling with her own feelings stirred up. She'd only been with me twice. She knew exactly how intense things could get. Then Wu Xiangyue strolled in from the training grounds, whip in hand, fresh from beating up Linghu Chongshan in a sparring match. She'd been challenging the two brothers daily. They'd started hiding from her. She spotted Lu Yin standing rigid and blushing at the door, heard the sounds from inside, and her face went red too. Wu Xiangyue grabbed Lu Yan's wrist and declared that tonight I was going to Lu Yan's room. No discussion. Lu Yan was too embarrassed to speak. That evening, the wives ganged up and sent me to her. In the middle of the night, I noticed her room was freezing, so I carried her to the main house to sleep where it was warmer. The next morning, I took Mu Wanqing's advice and gave everyone 3 days off before New Year. I announced a grand feast for all 2,000 people in Xinhe Crossing. We had plenty of food from raiding bandit camps, dozens of wild boars, deer, rice, flour. For 3 days, everyone ate as much as they wanted. On New Year's Eve, I handed out over 200 taels and bonuses based on everyone's contributions. Zhang Tizui delivered the highlight, a masterwork suit of armor he and his wife had worked day and night to finish. Then, just as darkness fell, a lone rider burst through the snowstorm. Northern barbarians have launched a surprise attack. I dropped my cup. Everyone froze. The Linghu brothers shot to their feet. If Tianyong City fell, barbarian cavalry would sweep straight through Yuzhou. The messenger reported 20,000 barbarians surrounding the city without attacking directly, while smaller forces raided the countryside, killing everyone they found. I cursed them and opened Xiaoshan's letter. She explained the situation. The emperor had purged over 30 officials suspected of aiding the enemy. The barbarian supply lines were completely cut, so they'd launched a desperate all-out assault. She'd sent for reinforcements, 3 to 5 days out. She needed me to protect the civilians and hold the line until help arrived. I studied Wuzhang's map. South of Tianyong City, there were only 2 routes, a mountain pass and the river. The river's key point was our water fortress at the Seven River Junction. Starving barbarians would raid southward for food, and Xinhe Crossing sat right in their path. I started giving orders. The Linghu brothers would march with me. Wu Xiangyue and Lin Xiaoxi would stay behind to guard the home territory. If things got desperate, everyone should retreat to the water fortress. Barbarians couldn't fight on water. Wu Jiang would manage village affairs and protect my wives. Wu Jiang clasped his fist and cracked a rare joke. If your 3 wives lose a single hair, I won't bother staying alive to face you. Then seriously, the village might fall, but the water fortress won't. I assembled the army and marched toward Wenhuang County. When we arrived, the low walls were lit up with torches. They recognized our Tiger Roar army banner and opened the gates. The garrison commander was Chun Bai, a former battlefield veteran now serving as a lowly jailer, the only competent military man the county had. Between guards, officials, and hastily drafted militia, they'd scraped together 500 or 600 poorly equipped defenders. I climbed the city wall and asked for a situation report. Chun Bai's face was grim. Scouts reported the barbarians had already reached Lianshui County, just 40 li south. They'd be at Wenhuang County within 3 hours. The barbarians knew the main forces were concentrated at Tianyong City, making these smaller counties easy pickings. Their horses could practically gallop over the low walls. Chun Bai was relieved to see my Tiger Roar army. He figured we could handle the small barbarian raiding parties. But when I told him I was marching out immediately to intercept the enemy at Lianshui County, he was stunned. He argued that my troops were tired from the march, and heading out risked ambushes. Defending Wenhuang County was the safer play. I turned to him and said our missions were different. He could hold the county. My job was to destroy the barbarians. If I let them raid freely and haul supplies back to their main army, the pressure on Tianyong City would only grow worse. With me out there, none of these raiders would make it home alive. The Linghu brothers were fired up. What's there to fear? Dying on the battlefield is a soldier's greatest honor. The gates opened, and my 1,000 soldiers marched out in tight formation. Watching us go from the wall, something stirred in Chunbai. He remembered he'd once been a fearsome warrior who'd trained Imperial guards. He'd let one injury and petty rivals bury him in this backwater. If I could build all this from nothing, why couldn't he? He grabbed his great bow and iron halberd, mounted his horse, and roared at his men to follow him into battle. He challenged their courage, their manhood, calling them cowards and turtles. Most of the constables made excuses: sick mothers, pregnant wives, young children. They had small, comfortable lives and didn't want to die. Who will go to their death with me? Chunbai shouted one final time. Mu Xiaoyang, my brother-in-law, stepped forward first, slamming his staff into the ground. Chunbai immediately refused him. The Mu family had already given one son to war injuries. Mu Xiaoyang was their only remaining healthy heir, newly married with no children. If he died, the family line ended. Chunbai couldn't face me or the Mu family if that happened. But Mu Xiaoyang insisted. He'd watched me grow from a nobody to a commander leading a real army. My words about dying on the battlefield had set his blood on fire. He wanted to fight. Chunbai overruled him and looked to the crowd. Slowly, others stepped forward. First a trickle, then more. Mostly refugees from Yenzhou who'd already lost everything. Then local men joined too. Some wanted to protect their homes. Most honestly wanted military merit to escape their miserable lives. When nearly 200 volunteers had gathered, Chunbai's expression finally softened. Chunbai armed the volunteers with armor stripped from the staying garrison, then marched 200 men out after us. Mu Xiaoyang quietly tagged along at the back. Chunbai saw him but didn't stop him this time. I didn't know about any of this. An hour later, we reached Liangshui County. From a slope 5 li outside, we could see the city burning. Wang Dinglu had already scouted ahead. The barbarians were still inside looting, mostly gathering grain at the north end of town. Civilians had fled or died. The place was nearly empty. We faced a dilemma. If we went after the grain convoy, barbarian riders would continue south toward Wenhuang County. If we fought the riders, the grain gets through to feed their main army. Zhai Shanchuan wanted to charge straight in. Wang Dinglu called him an idiot. A blind charge wasn't a surprise attack. I had to smile. Zhai Shanchuan just shrugged and said he didn't bother thinking. He just did whatever I told him. I laid out the plan. Linghu Yuanshan would take Lu Lang's 300 wolf cavalry north to intercept the grain convoy. Light resistance, quick fight, hide the captured supplies, then circle back. 200 men would stay in reserve, hidden and waiting for orders. The remaining 500 would set an ambush in the tree line opposite us. Linghu Yuanshan worried we'd be outnumbered 3-1. I pointed out the barbarians didn't know our numbers. The 200 reserves were my decoy force, classic misdirection. He understood and moved out. I had the infantry set up shield walls with bamboo spears in front. In the darkness, the bamboo thicket was invisible. Cavalry wouldn't see it until they were already impaled. Archers positioned at shield openings and behind trees, ready to fire from cover. If any barbarians chased into the forest, Linghu Yuanshan's ambush would finish them. Then came the critical part. If I didn't lure the barbarians out in force, they'd scatter across the countryside and my formation would be wasted. I needed them angry and charging together. I picked the 2 strongest fighters, Linghu Chongshan and Zhai Shanchuan, and the 3 of us rode for the city. I wore my peerless armor. Zhai Shanchuan had the custom iron armor I'd made for him, and Linghu Chongshan wore his own set with Fengling army markings removed. All defensive gear. As long as we avoided massed arrows, we'd be fine. My orders were simple. Get inside fast, kill enough barbarians to enrage them, then pull out quickly and draw them into our kill zone. We rode through the broken gates unopposed. The barbarians hadn't bothered posting guard since their only goal was grabbing food and leaving. What we saw inside was horrifying. The entire county was ablaze. Streets were covered with corpses. Shops stood with doors ripped open, grain scattered across the ground. Everything was painted in red, blood and firelight mixed together. The smell of burning flesh filled every breath. The barbarians had left their horses loose on the main streets while they looted. Some were hauling supplies. Others were assaulting women. Screams and laughter mixed together in the most sickening way. Across the street, a barbarian held a 7-year-old girl under his boot, laughing. He grabbed her head, cut it off with one stroke, and tossed it aside like a ball. Linghu Chongshan and Zhai Shanchuan wanted to kill him immediately. I stopped them cold. We couldn't lose focus. Our mission was to lure them out. Liangshui County was already lost. We couldn't save these people. But if we didn't stop the barbarians here, Manhwa County and our own base would be next. Don't sacrifice the greater goal for a smaller one. I ordered them to kill horses instead. Zhai Shanchuan roared a challenge that echoed through the streets like thunder, drawing barbarians from every direction. He carved through them with his saber, while Linghu Chongshan's halberd cut down men and horses together. We slaughtered over 20 war horses. To the barbarians, their horses were everything. That made them furious, which was exactly what I wanted. When enough were enraged and converging on us, I ordered the retreat. The two wanted to keep fighting, but they knew the bigger picture mattered. As we rode out, I pulled a grenade from my armor, lit it, and tossed it behind us. The explosion panicked the surviving horses and peppered them with iron nails. We reached the tree line. Our archers opened fire into the darkness. The barbarians had chased us right into the trap. Dozens of riders in front went down before they even knew where the arrows came from. The survivors wheeled around and fled back. Then came the real charge. Over 1,000 barbarian cavalry assembled at the city gates and launched a full-scale attack. Their commander was experienced. He judged from the arrow volume that we were a small force and decided to crush us. But when the first wave reached the forest edge, they slammed into my shield wall and bamboo spear barrier. The tall shields blocked their view completely, and the bamboo thicket shredded everything that came close. Horses and riders piled up in front of the barrier. Those who fell and tried to stand were picked off by arrows from unknown positions. The first clash cost them over 500 men. They pulled back quickly. Linghu Chongshan started resetting the shield wall for another defensive round, but I stopped him. I ordered everyone into the trees and split our forces for a counterattack, trying to encircle them. The barbarian general adapted fast. He scattered his cavalry into small mobile groups using hit-and-run tactics. This was what steppe warriors did best. Suddenly, we were the targets, pinned down behind shields while mounted archers circled and fired from every angle. All we could do was hold behind the tower shields and wait for Lu Lang and Linghu Yuanshan to return with the wolf cavalry. That was our only card left. Then shouting erupted from behind us. Zhai Shanchuan looked through a shield slit and yelled that reinforcements had arrived. I peered out and cursed. Chunbai, what are you doing here? You idiot. You're going to get killed. Chunbai had started mobilizing right after I left, so he wasn't far behind. He arrived just as the barbarian cavalry had us surrounded. To his credit, he had enough battlefield sense to duck into the tree line, which is where he ran into us. Zhai Shanchuan asked if we should rescue them. I was furious. These idiots had wrecked my entire plan. My shield formation was perfectly sized for my troops. Cramming 200 more bodies inside would ruin everything. But I couldn't let them die out there. I ordered the shields opened. Zhai Shanchuan waved them in. Chunbai spotted us and nearly cried with relief. The second he stumbled inside, I punched him square in the chest. You were supposed to hold Manhwa County. What are you doing here? He mumbled about bringing reinforcements. I told him this wasn't help, it was sabotage. Before he showed up, my formation was intact, and I was just waiting for my cavalry to return for the kill. Zhai Shanchuan punched him too. Nobody was happy. Then Chunbai looked around and realized Mu Xiaoyang was missing. My blood went cold. My brother-in-law, the Mu family's only healthy son, newly married, no children. His brother was already crippled. If Mu Xiaoyang died out here, the family line was finished. How would I face my father-in-law? My wives? I slapped Chunbai across the face and told him if anything happened to Mu Xiaoyang, he wouldn't need to bother staying alive either. He took it without a word. He knew he'd messed up. Minutes later, wolf howls echoed across the field. Lu Lang and his cavalry had arrived. The barbarians had already burned through their arrows during the long standoff. When 300 wolf riders slammed into their flank, they drew sabers and fought desperately. I'd been holding in rage all night. I roared the order, the shields opened, and everyone charged out. Zhai Shanchuan and Chunbai led the rush. Zhai Shanchuan because he loved killing. Chunbai because he needed to release his guilt on something. I committed the reserves, and we crushed the barbarian force from all sides. Half an hour later, it was over. But we couldn't find Mu Xiaoyang anywhere. No body, no sign. Chunbai was panicking, running from spot to spot searching. Then Wang Dingliu's voice rang out. Found him. His men were carrying an unconscious figure who looked like a drunk ragdoll. Wang Dingliu reported that Mu Xiaoyang was unhurt, just terrified. First time on a real battlefield. Stumbled into a ditch in the darkness. A few scrapes, nothing serious. Chunbai burst out laughing with relief. I didn't smile. He shut up immediately. I ordered everyone into Liangshui County to hunt down remaining barbarians. Linghu Chongshan took 100 men to retrieve the captured grain. I made it clear, no harming civilians, kill every barbarian still breathing. Chunbai quietly joined the cleanup crews. All that bravado from his speech in Wanhuang County was gone. He'd fought bandits before, but a real war between nations, the sheer brutality of it, had shattered his illusions. He'd charged out on hot blood alone, and reality had hit him like a wall. Without me, he and his volunteers would have been slaughtered. The man who'd once looked down on me and haggled over bounty money was now just another soldier following my orders without question. At dawn, Liangshui County was a nightmare. Over 1,000 charred corpses, the stench of burned flesh everywhere. Linghu Chongshan reported finding about 100 civilians hiding in the city. The county government office had no survivors. We distributed captured grain to the living. Our casualties, 65 wounded, 0 dead, 11 serious. Most injuries came from when we'd had to open the shield wall for Chunbai's men. Stray arrows had gotten through. Wang Dinglu glared at Chunbai. Without his blundering arrival, we'd have taken almost no damage. Chunbai was ghost white. He'd finally grasped what he'd done. The men I brought, fewer than 50 survived. He collapsed to the ground and wept. Those who'd lived had only made it because they'd gotten inside our shield formation. The rest, over 150 men he'd rallied with inspiring speeches, were dead because of his reckless charge. All his past glory, his time training Imperial Guards, shattered in one night. He finally understood. Personal bravery meant nothing in real war. I'd used 1,000 men split into 3 groups to annihilate twice our number. He'd brought 200 and gotten most of them killed within minutes. I told him what's done is done. Then he stood up, wiped his tears, and begged to join my army, even as the lowest soldier. He said he owed those 150 dead men, and he needed to kill enough barbarians to settle that debt. I told him it wasn't my decision alone and asked who'd take him. The Linghu brothers shook their heads. They despised his recklessness. Lu Lang and Zhai Shanchuan looked disgusted. Chunbai dropped to his knees and turned to his last hope. Brother Wang, please take me. Wang Dinglu sighed. He was the softest-hearted of my commanders. He agreed, warning Chunbai that in the Tiger Roar army there was no Officer Chun, just a soldier who followed orders or faced consequences. After 2 hours of rest, scouts brought intelligence. The barbarians had sent 3 raiding parties in different directions around Tianyong City. We destroyed the one that came south. The other 2 had likely already grabbed supplies and headed back. Enough grain to feed their army for 3 to 5 days. Linghu Chongshan figured they'd attack the city soon. I disagreed. Siege warfare was their weakness. They were waiting for something. Then it hit me. I asked about Fengling Army's food supply schedule. The brothers said provisions came monthly, due any day now. That was it. The barbarians' real target wasn't the city. It was the supply convoy. Think about it. Longju normally handled logistics. She'd been ambushed and nearly killed on her way back. With her wounded and recovering at my village, the Fengling Army supply chain was at its most vulnerable. The barbarians knew this. They were waiting to intercept the grain shipment. Without food, the Fengling Army would starve behind their own walls. No siege needed. And the city itself had barely any reserves. I tried buying grain there before and found almost nothing. Even if civilians donated what they could, it wouldn't sustain 5,000 soldiers for long. Xiaoshan probably didn't even realize how dire the food situation truly was. By my calculation, the Fengling Army had fewer than 10 days of supplies left. I explained my theory to the group. If I were the barbarian commander, I'd surround Tianyong City without attacking, intercept the food supply, then use psychological warfare, pile up civilian corpses outside the walls to spread panic. Once the city ran out of food, the people would turn on the army themselves. Right as I finished talking, a messenger confirmed it. That very morning, the barbarians had stacked civilian corpses outside Tianyong City's gates. The city was in chaos. Linghu Yuanshan slammed the table in fury, but I kept thinking. The corpses were bait. If the army rushed out to recover them, the barbarians would be waiting. Meanwhile, if the supply convoy got intercepted, the city would starve within 3 days. I asked about the reinforcements Xiaoshan had mentioned. The brothers exchanged uncomfortable looks. The emperor had sent 10,000 troops, but the commanding general was a notorious playboy. He'd probably treat the march like a sightseeing trip and arrive months late. So the reinforcements were useless. Why would the emperor send someone so unreliable to save his own army? Something didn't add up, but I filed that away for later. I asked about the supply convoy, 1,000 soldiers, with another 1,000 from the city meeting them halfway. The route passed right by our territory. That gave me an idea. I wrote a detailed letter to Xiaoshan laying out my plan. On the day the grain convoy arrived, the Fengling army had to march out in full force, making it look like they were absolutely determined to secure the supplies. When the barbarians attacked, they should abandon the grain and retreat to the city as fast as possible. The brothers were alarmed. Full deployment risked the entire army getting surrounded. I told them you can't catch a wolf without risking the child as bait. Then I started issuing rapid orders. Zhai Shanchuan would go to Wanhuan County and collect every flammable material he could find. Old clothes, cooking equipment, anything that burned. Wang Dinglu would race back to the village for all our hay and straw. Linghu Yuanshan and Lu Lang would take their cavalry near Tianyong City and systematically eliminate barbarian scouts and spies, but only once per day, ensuring the enemy received information, just fragmented and unreliable. The brothers started to understand. A decoy strategy? Not exactly, I smiled. The barbarians are playing the waiting game. So we'll give them exactly what they're waiting for, and then stab them in the heart. I laid out the full plan in 3 moves. The brothers worried that such bold action would provoke the entire 50,000-man army. I told them the barbarians wouldn't keep fighting once they committed their forces forward, because we'd be behind them, burning their camp to the ground. Everyone gasped. And while we're there, I continued, we cut off the head. Their top generals will stay in camp while the main force chases the grain convoy. We go in, kill the commanders, and burn everything. An army without leaders is just a mob. The room went from stunned silence to electric excitement. Raiding the enemy camp was already a massive achievement. Killing their commanding general? That would be legendary. I assigned the teams. Linghu Chongshan, Zhai Shanchuan, Shenbai, and I would raid the enemy camp. The most dangerous mission requiring the best fighters. When Linghu Yuanshan returned, Wang Dinglu would take him to intercept the grain convoy. If things went wrong, they'd fall back to Wanhuan County and wait. Everyone accepted without argument and went to prepare. Meanwhile, at the Fengling army camp in Tianyong City, my secret letter arrived. Xiaoshan opened it eagerly, then went quiet. She passed it around. Seasoned General Ji Bu nearly shouted that I was sending them to their deaths, marching the entire army out of the city as bait. Zhongli Mei read it and smiled. He understood immediately. I was setting a trap, using the Fengling army as the lure while I made my real move behind enemy lines. He pointed out that whatever risks were involved, I'd never put Xiaoshan's life in danger. Xiaoshan blushed and glared at him. General Ing, who didn't even read the letter. He just said, I trust him. Long Ju, still recovering from her wounds, said the same. I'd saved her life, and she'd follow the plan without hesitation. Her job had always been logistics, so protecting the grain was her duty regardless. Xiaoshan decided to trust me too. She added her own layer. Used the full army deployment as cover to flush out barbarian spies inside the city. General Ingbu worried that marching the whole army out would spread panic. Civilians might think they were being abandoned. Xiaoshan said her father could handle the city. Leaving the spies in place was the real danger. The orders went out. Prepare for full deployment within days. Every soldier should be ready to fight to the death if anything went wrong. Days later, my Tiger Roar army was camped deep in the forest near Tianyong City. I'd set up enough cooking fires to suggest a force of 10,000. Classic deception. Linghu Yuanshan's cavalry killed a few barbarian scouts each day while deliberately letting others see just enough to report back fragmented, confusing intelligence. It worked perfectly. Inside the barbarian command tent, their generals were arguing. They knew something was coming but couldn't get clear information. Their spies in the city reported that a 10,000-man relief army with massive grain supplies was approaching. If those reinforcements merged with the Fengling army, the barbarians would lose any chance of taking the city. The barbarians had no choice. Even if it was a trap, they had to fight. Their numerical advantage, 50,000 against what they believed was 15,000, gave them confidence. Open field combat was their specialty. Letting the grain through meant total failure. After debate, they settled on a plan. Instead of stealing the grain, they'd burn it. Even if reinforcements arrived, no food meant 10,000 extra mouths to feed inside the city, which would accelerate Tianyong City's collapse. A clever strategy. What they didn't know was that the relief army was a joke. led by a playboy general who was probably still sightseeing hundreds of miles away. In my own tent, I laid out my prediction to my officers. The barbarians would try to burn the grain rather than capture it. It was the most practical move. Everyone nodded, amazed at how I'd gotten inside the enemy's head. Then Wang Dinglu burst through the tent flap. "They're coming." Wang Dinglu reported the grain convoy had reached Wanhuang County's border. Identity checks were done. They'd arrive within an hour. I told everyone to get ready, especially the special items I'd requested. Wang Dinglu brought in a box from Mu Wanqing. Inside were my grenades, carefully packed in straw. The Linghu brothers recognized them immediately. Chen Bai had no idea what they were. I distributed 2 grenades, each to Linghu Chongshan, Zhai Shanchuan, and Chen Bai, along with fire strikers. These were their last line of survival. I took them outside for a quick demonstration. Linghu Yuanshan pouted about being left out. His brother patted his shoulder and promised to tell him how cool they were later. An hour later, the grain convoy's banners appeared in the distance. Almost simultaneously, the barbarian camp erupted. Over 20,000 riders and archers poured out, heading to intercept. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Their camp now held only 1,000 or so old and weak soldiers. I'd already circled behind the barbarian camp with Linghu Chongshan, Bai, and Zhai Shanchuan. Watching the main army march away, I knew the battle on the other side had begun. Zhai Shanchuan wanted to charge immediately. I smacked his head and made everyone study the map first. The Linghu brothers had sketched the camp layout from their scouting missions. It had cost lives to gather this intelligence. The command tent belonged to the barbarian supreme commander, Hu Luqi. 18 tribal leaders' tents surrounded it, each with a deputy. Over 30 high-value targets. I assigned roles. Chen Bai would use his old Imperial Guard credentials to rally the enslaved laborers inside the camp into rebellion. Linghu Chongshan would hit the 18 tribal leaders' tents, kill as many as possible. Zhai Shanchuan would come with me straight to the command tent. 1 hour, then we'd regroup. We charged in on 4 horses, fast and loud. No point hiding, speed was everything. We split up and cut down every barbarian we encountered. The camp guards couldn't even grab their weapons before they fell. Meanwhile, at Tianyong City, everything unfolded exactly as planned. The Fengling army marched out in full force. The grain convoy approached from the south. The barbarians charged to intercept. The escort troops panicked and fled into the trees, abandoning the grain. The barbarians celebrated and swarmed the convoy. Then arrows rained down, and the grain burst into flames. It had all been decoys. The Fengling army retreated behind the walls and unleashed the bed crossbows from the ramparts, devastating the confused barbarians below. The raiders who'd rushed to grab the grain stood bewildered. The enemy had surrendered the supplies without a fight, and now everything was burning. While chaos consumed both sides of the battlefield, Zhai Shanchuan and I dismounted and burst into the command tent. Inside sat over a dozen senior barbarian commanders, the leaders who'd stayed behind while their armies fought. They stared at our unfamiliar faces in total confusion. They couldn't comprehend that 2 men had just charged into the heart of the barbarian empire's military headquarters. Just 2 of us. The barbarian supreme commander, Hu Luqi, sat on his throne laughing when we burst in. He spoke perfect imperial language and complimented our bravery, 2 men daring to storm his camp. He said we had more guts than the entire Fengling army hiding behind their walls. Then he casually tore off a piece of lamb and offered us a quick death if we surrendered. I just smiled. While he was talking, I'd already mapped every person in the tent and planned my attack route. I gave Zhai Shanchuan a look and said, "You want to leave us whole bodies, but all of you are about to die." I lit 2 grenades. The barbarian generals sensed danger but didn't understand what we were holding. Hu Luqi shouted, "Attack!" and over a dozen commanders drew their swords and charged. I laughed. They were actually clustering together, making my grenades even deadlier. I tossed both. Zhai Shanchuan threw his, and we dove out of the tent. The explosion blew the entire command tent apart. Debris and body parts rained down. Inside, the generals had been shredded by iron nails, some torn to pieces, others writhing on the ground. Zhai Shanchuan and I charged back in with our sabers and finished everyone still breathing. We tied the severed heads to our belts by the hair. I burst out holding Hu Luqi's head high, shouting that their supreme commander was dead. The surviving barbarians froze. Some charged at us for revenge, so Zhai Shanchuan threw 2 more grenades into the crowd. Then the freed slaves, over 2,000 laborers Chun Bai had liberated, swarmed in from every direction with rocks, fists, even teeth. Years of rage unleashed at once. We fought our way to our horses and rode to the rendezvous. Linghu Chongshan arrived shortly after with a pack of barbarian riders chasing him. We cut them down together and galloped for Wenhuang County. Back at the barbarian lines, their generals discovered the forest camp with all its smoke and shadows had been completely fake, decoys I'd built. They wanted to chase us to Wenhuang County, but then scouts reported their main camp was burning. They raced back to find it devastated. The freed slaves had taken everything portable and torched the rest. The barbarians managed to save about half their supplies. Meanwhile, Zhongli Mei led the Fengling army cavalry out for a night raid, killing even more barbarians. Total enemy losses from both engagements, around 5,000 fighters, plus the incalculable damage to their camp and leadership. That night at Wenhuang County, I laid out over 20 severed heads on the ground. I was very satisfied. Between us, I'd killed 7 commanders inside the tent. Zhai Shanchuan got the rest in there. Linghu Chongshan took 4 deputy commanders outside, and Chun Bai killed 2 more. The Linghu brothers identified them. Besides Hu Luqi himself, 7 were tribal chieftains, the rest were deputies. I decapitated the barbarian command structure. I ordered a large wooden chest prepared. Tomorrow morning, I'd send a gift to Tianyong City. Tonight, the whole army would feast. The next morning, Linghu Chongshan delivered the chest to the Fengling army camp with an escort of wolf cavalry. He marched into the command tent and announced loudly to his sister that their general had sent her a present. 2 soldiers carried the chest forward. Everyone who'd been up all night suddenly perked up, staring at the box. General Ingbu was already grinning, saying the Fengling army hadn't lost a single soldier while crushing barbarian morale, and now I'd sent them a surprise on top of it. The generals at the Fengling army camp all knew the truth. The full army deployment, the grain convoy confrontation, those were just the stage I'd set. Their part had been the sideshow. The real question was what I'd done behind the curtain. They'd guessed I might raid the barbarian camp, but dismissed the idea as too crazy for a 1,000-man militia. Then last night, when the enemy camp lit up the sky with flames, Ingbu finally let go of the breath he'd been holding. He admitted I wasn't just bold, I was precise. Now everyone was staring at the wooden chest Linghu Chongshan had carried in. Xiaoshan walked up to open it, then paused with her hand in the air. "Did any of you get hurt?" She'd been restless all night, unable to sleep. My brother-in-law told her everyone made it back safely. She exhaled with relief and lifted the lid. She stumbled backward into the sand table, stammering, "This, is that him?" The generals crowded around and their jaws dropped. Hu Luqi, Feng Baining, the vanguard commander Nabani, Hu Bai Hitai. One after another, they identified the heads. Nearly 70% of the barbarian high command was in that box. The entire leadership spine of 50,000 troops gone. Xiaoshan couldn't form coherent sentences. She demanded to know how I'd done it, asking if the whole army had attacked. Linghu Chongshan told her I'd taken exactly 3 people, for total including myself. As for how, he squirmed. I'd made them all swear secrecy about the grenades. He finally said, there were a few loud bangs. Then it was basically just chopping vegetables. Nothing too difficult. Everyone stared at him like he'd gone insane. Xiaoshan wanted to kick her own brother. These barbarian generals were individually as strong as her own top commanders. Chopping vegetables was absurd. Ingbu stepped in diplomatically. He said I clearly had my own methods, and if I didn't want to share, pushing wouldn't help. He was right. Linghu Chongshan wasn't refusing to tell. I'd forbidden it. Ingbu actually looked envious that the Linghu brothers had earned my trust so quickly. Xiaoshan figured it out immediately. The loud bangs matched what Long Ju had reported from the assassination attempt. The same weapon she'd begged me for, and I'd refused to give her. That stung. She silently added another mark to my debt. She issued orders. Parade the heads through the army and city, then hang them on the gates. Send scouts to assess the barbarian remnants. Then Linghu Chongshan delivered my additional instructions. After dark, she should spread iron caltrops outside the walls, disguised as a mission to recover civilian corpses, and actually bring some bodies back to sell the deception. Then rest the army and prepare for the barbarians' desperate all-out assault. She frowned. Recovering corpses as cover made sense. But how was I so certain the barbarians would attack after losing most of their commanders? Linghu Chongshan scratched his head, trying to remember my exact words. Something about your enemy's weakness is also your advantage, and a blade kills but also saves. And when surrounding an enemy, always leave a gap. He'd been so excited about the heads that he'd forgotten half of what I'd said. Xiaoshan asked about the captured spies inside the city. Was I suggesting she used them somehow? Her brain was too fried to puzzle it out. She'd reached the same conclusion as everyone else. Just do whatever I said. The generals looked at each other blankly. None of them understood my cryptic messages either. Back in Wenhuang County, I analyzed the situation for Linghu Yuanshan. The barbarian commanders believed the Fengling army had no food and no reinforcements coming. Even though we'd killed Hu Luqi and most of their top generals, they still had enough officers to lead an attack. They had no choice but to go all in on a siege. Retreating empty-handed would cause political chaos back home. Their Khan's authority depended on results, and their loose tribal alliance would fracture if they failed. Linghu Yuanshan asked how I knew so much about barbarian internal politics. I brushed it off, saying we'd gotten intelligence from a captured spy at a barbarian camp. The real source was Wu Jiang, but his identity had to stay secret. The advantage was ours now. They'd lost their supreme commander, morale was shattered, and city walls favored defenders. I'd already sent instructions to Xiaoshan through Linghu Chongshan. Leave one side of the siege open to give the barbarians a retreat path. Cornered armies fight to the death, but armies with an escape route will eventually run. A few days later, scouts reported the Imperial Relief Army had arrived 70 li from Wenhuang County. Then a heavy snowstorm hit, and their useless commander set up camp in a valley to wait it out. I nearly laughed. He was lucky the snow hadn't triggered an avalanche on top of them. Then word came. The barbarian army had consolidated and was advancing on Tianyong City's gates. My officers asked when we'd ride to help. I shook my head. We had 1,000 Tiger Roar soldiers and 1,000 supply troops against at least 30,000 attackers. Charging in was suicide. Besides, I'd already given Xiaoshan the caltrops and other tools. Let the barbarians grind themselves against those defenses first. I ordered the army to keep resting and scouts to keep reporting. At Tianyong City, the barbarians attacked with discipline. Infantry pushing forward with siege ladders under massive arrow barrages. The volume of arrows was so intense that the Fengling army couldn't even peek over the walls. Barbarian soldiers reached the base and started setting up ladders. The city's archers fired through narrow slots, but couldn't stop the flood of enemies. Xiaoshan waited until they were close enough, then gave the order. Ingbu unleashed all 12-bed crossbows simultaneously. The first volley used quicklime bolts. Massive wooden shafts screamed through the air and exploded among the barbarian archers, spraying blinding lime powder everywhere. Archers dropped their bows and clawed at their burning eyes, howling in agony. The second volley hit their now-broken formation with devastating force. Each bolt plowed through multiple men. Unlucky ones were impaled and carried through the air, smashing into others before landing as mangled remains. Jibu's archers targeted the climbers on the walls while soldiers set fire to the siege ladders. Xiaoshan's plan was simple. Once the crossbows forced a retreat, the barbarians would pull back, having lost significant numbers. Every wave they threw at the walls would cost them dearly. I wasn't at the battle, but from the reports that came in later, I pieced together everything that happened at Tianyong City. The bed crossbows devastated the barbarian archers. The quicklime bolts blinded them in waves, and the exploding wooden shafts sent lethal splinters everywhere. The barbarians' formation collapsed. More than half their archers were out of action. With the pressure on the walls reduced, Ingbu switched to caltrop-loaded bolts, scattering iron spikes across the advancing infantry. By the time the foot soldiers reached the walls, they'd already lost half their numbers, though most were wounded rather than killed, which still destroyed their fighting ability. Then the real horror began. The wall-climbing assault turned into a bloody meat grinder. Ladders went up, men climbed, men fell like dead leaves. Blood made everything slippery. Bodies piled up at the base of the walls. Both sides kept throwing fresh soldiers into the killing zone without pause. The barbarian commander was no fool. He noticed the east and west walls were lower and unprotected by crossbows, so he split his cavalry to attack from both sides. Xiaoshan was forced to pull 800 soldiers from the main fight to cover those flanks. The caltrops I'd had her scatter on both sides paid off. Barbarian horses stumbled and fell before they could reach the walls, turning their cavalry flanking maneuver into chaos. They couldn't use sandbag ramps or set up ladders easily under archer fire. But the north gate was cracking. The barbarians were hacking through the outer door with axes. It would hold maybe half an hour more. Behind it stood Linghu Zheng with 1,000 of his elite axemen as the last line. The magistrate organized civilian volunteers to help, but Xiaoshan wisely kept them off the main walls. Untrained people seeing that level of carnage would panic and get in the soldiers' way. She sent them to guard the east and west gates instead. The fighting ground to a stalemate. Zhong Limei approached Xiaoshan and asked permission to lead the cavalry out in a sortie, draw some attackers away, and relieve wall pressure. He said dying on the battlefield was a warrior's finest end, and that buying time until reinforcements arrived was worth the sacrifice. Xiaoshan looked at him, weighing the decision. She knew sending cavalry out against 30,000 was essentially a death sentence.